Chapter 732. The dwarves were naturally on guard against humans. This was the same reason as the elves being on guard against humans. Humans were one of the most complicated races on the continent. Saying they were noble, of course it wasn't right, but saying they were evil wasn't completely right either. However, the human traffickers and hunters in the Forest of Chaos were mostly working for the humans. The humans were gradually becoming the wealthiest and most technologically advanced group on the continent. Although the human race's overall strength was weaker than the spirit beasts and elves, their future potential could already be seen. The dwarves already had nothing. Being on guard was being on guard, but there was nothing to lie about, so he said everything he could. This dwarf's full name was Tino Oldman, living in the Oldman mines 200 kilometers away. The Oldman mines had around 50,000 dwarves at its peak, and after 100 years of development, they had built a large underground palace. The dwarves were a bit similar to the dragons, having a strong hoarding and liking to collect precious things. But compared to the dragons who were greedy, the dwarves only liked mineral deposits, like precious metals, rare crystal ores, or divine weapons. Therefore, an old mine that had been operating for 100 years was no different from a treasure. This was also the source of all disasters. The dwarves followed the dark forest law, trying their best to hide themselves, but they were different from the other races. Once the other races were exposed, they would immediately move away, but the dwarves could not give up on their mines. The Oldman mines were finally exposed, attracting countless greedy people. But the dwarves were a race of warriors. They were well equipped with powerful weapons and were very powerful in battle. Adding in the defense system they had built over 100 years, it was very hard for enemies to break in. In the last 10 years, they had been attacked every now and then, but the dwarves had won every time. Only long-term battles had consumed the dwarves' population, reducing them to around half of their peak population. While the dwarves were feeling tired, a powerful opponent had appeared. This guy was Cannon, nicknamed the Spider Count. Cannon had hired large amounts of bandits to attack from the outside, and he had the spider army dig tunnels to launch a sneak attack from the inside. After a fierce battle, the dwarves were either dead or captured alive. The entire Oldman mines had fallen, and even those that managed to escape were powerless to reverse the situation. The dwarves' 100 years of wealth had been taken by Cannon, and over 1,000 dwarves had been sold as slaves to human countries. The entire Oldman dwarf clan was finished. Tino drank cup after cup of wine with a face filled with resentment. Vivian was filled with righteous indignation. He is just a nobody this princess has never heard of, yet he can be this arrogant. Brother dwarves, don't worry, we will help you take back the mines. Meng Yingying scratched her head, a bit not understanding. I know about spirit beasts and elves, but what are these spirit insects? From the Spider Count nickname and the dwarf's description, this fellow was without a doubt a spirit insect. The Forest of Chaos did not just have a few strong powers on the surface, there were many other powers that were hidden and unknown. The spirit insect power was like this. As for how strong they were, the elves all had their own theories, and there was no conclusion for a long time. The spirit insects were very special, living in the underground world. Most of the underground cities were ruled by various spirit insects, so in terms of influence, the spirit insects were not inferior to the elves or spirit beasts. But because the spirit insects did not like living on the surface, they rarely clashed with the elves or spirit beasts, so it was hard to estimate the other side's strength. There were some elven elders who expressed their opinions that the spirit insects hidden in the Forest of Chaos underground world were much stronger than imagined. They were one of the most mysterious powers in the Forest of Chaos, so the elves had to take precautions. But there were elven elders who thought that the spirit insects were similar to the spirit beasts. There were many different races. There were many different spirit insect races that would fight with each other, and the intensity would not be inferior to the battles on the surface. Although there were many of them, there was nothing to worry about. No matter who was right, the large amount of spirit insects in the Forest of Chaos was an indisputable fact. From Tino's description, the Spider Count Cannon was very strong. Not to mention that Cannon had at least 20–30,000 people in his hands, and they were all not weak troops. No matter how strong Chu Tian's group was, if they met a battle where the numbers were not equal, they would be exhausted to death. Once their spirit energy was exhausted, it was useless no matter how high their cultivation base was. We don't have enough people, how many dwarven soldiers are left? Although the dwarves were not smart, they still had to be careful when it came to the whereabouts of their companions. Who knew if this fellow in front of them was Canon's plan to eliminate the remaining dwarves? If we don't even have basic trust, how can we help you? Humans, how can I trust you? Tino coldly said, would you be so kind as to help the dwarves fight? Dwarves looked. Vivian stood up and released her powerful spirit energy. A dagger filled with spatial energy appeared. If you still think I'm Canon's subordinate, then I have nothing to say. Spirit energy strength. True spirit realm. It was a spatial attributed source spirit. True spirit realm experts were very rare, not to mention a true spirit realm expert with an innate spatial attribute. Even if Canon had skills as high as the sky, he could not find this kind of person to work for him. Not to mention that Vivian was an elf and the elves were a trustworthy race. The dwarves have 5,000 soldiers retreat to the new mines and prepare for battle. Tino no longer hesitated as he immediately stood up and said, as long as you help the dwarves take back the Oldman mine, no matter what you want, the dwarves will agree. 5,000 people? This number was a bit small, but it was enough. This place was far from the southern summer country, so it was not convenient for Chu Tian to bring the army over, so he could only make do with it. The dwarf race was brave and good at fighting. 5,000 of them was not a weak force. The dwarves' gathering place was a new mine that had been developed for less than 2 years. It looked like a cave from the surface, but there were several long tracks inside. There were large black iron carts on the tracks and the smelting room had just been built, so it looked very simple. The 5,000 dwarves were hiding here, planning to take back the Oldman mine that belonged to the dwarves. Although they knew that fighting with the strength of 5,000 people was no different from sending themselves to death, the dwarves were a stubborn race, so they would give it a try no matter what. Tino brought back reinforcements at this time and the other dwarves were very surprised. An old dwarf chief was questioning their strength. After all, whether it was the humans or the elves, they were all very young. Chu Tian felt that if he wanted to negotiate with these fellows, he had to show his strength first. Ying, come out. Chu Tian directly said to the dwarf chief, this is the one with the lowest cultivation. If the old chief can harm a single hair on her head, we will help the dwarves for free. Arrogant humans. The old chief disdainfully said, I am in the 8th awakened soul layer and the dwarves have a strong cultivation technique. Even if it was a 9th awakened soul layer cultivator, they wouldn't dare say they wouldn't be injured. Why are you this confident? This is only a bet. Chu Tian softly said, if you can't harm her after we defeat Canon, I want half of the wealth in the dwarves' mines. Every dwarf was fuming with rage and anger. This fellow was too greedy. He actually opened his mouth and asked for half. The Oldman mines reserves were the dwarves' 100 years of collection. Canon had only occupied the Oldman mines for half a year and most of the things had not been transported yet. This half was a shocking number. This fellow was simply asking for a lion's mouth. This is very fair. Chu Tian did not think his price was high at all. Without the help of the 5 of us, not to mention half of your 5,000 people, you would only be sending yourselves to death. The dwarves were famous for their stubborn tempers. How could they tolerate this kind of arrogance? A dwarf shouted, you want to take half with just the 5 of you, don't you think you're too greedy? It's not quantity, it's quality. The benefits and risks are equal. Chu Tian did not back down at all. No one knows if Canon has a stronger power behind him, so helping the dwarves this time is also a risk for us. Alright, I'll bet with you. The dwarf pulled out a battle hammer. This hammer was completely black and flowing with the glow of lava, releasing a strong aura. It was clearly a soul-contracting weapon. I want to see if you can block my hammer. The might of a soul-contracting weapon was shocking. The old dwarf chief had a deep cultivation base at the 8th awakened soul layer. The most important thing was that the dwarf's cultivation technique was wild, overbearing, and powerful. Even if a 9th awakened soul layer cultivator was hit by this hammer, if they didn't die, they would still be heavily injured. Meng Yingying gave a snort and her body was covered in starlight. Come at me. If I dodge, it'll be your win." The old patriarch let out a low roar, and the floor under his feet cracked from the oppressive force. The huge hammer erupted with intense flames, and the air in the entire mine was boiling hot. When the hammer was swung up, the surrounding space crackled, as if a fire dragon was dancing in his hand. Meng Yingying's brows jumped up. The dwarf's strength was truly overbearing. She immediately put away her contempt and released her source spirit, which was a beautiful mirror. A glow came from the mirror and covered Meng Yingying's body. Yingying's mirror source spirit had two abilities. The first ability was mirror imitation. As long as she was strong enough, Yingying could copy any cultivation technique or source spirit. Although it was only temporary, it allowed her to have all kinds of abilities. The second ability was mirror reflection, which was a defensive ability. When Yingying was attacked, this source spirit's power would reflect a part of the attack back. When the Starlight Immortal Body and Mirror Source Spirit were used at the same time, Yingying's defensive power increased by several times. The dwarf chief's wild hammer slammed down on Yingying's body. With a giant explosion sound, the surrounding ground was shattered by the force. Meng Yingying only used her arms to block it, and she wasn't injured at all. What? The dwarf chief was shocked. An earth-shattering strength was reflected back at him like a mountain. The dwarf chief spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying into the wall, creating a large hole in it. The other dwarves were all shocked. Meng Yingying had a proud look on her face. Although the starlight protecting her body was showing signs of cracking, it had not been broken. This old fellow was truly strong. Meng Yingying used all her strength to activate the mirror source spirit and used up half of her spirit energy to send him flying. The dwarves did not look down on these 5 people at all. If the weakest person had this kind of strength, then how strong was the strongest? This team of 5 had the ability to turn defeat into victory for the dwarves. The dwarf chief was supported by his clansmen as he walked out. The dwarves agree to your request. As long as you can kill Cannon and take back the mine for the dwarves, half of the wealth will belong to you. Chapter 733. In the era Chu Tian lived in, the barbarians no longer existed. Chu Tian had done some research on this race. Speaking of the barbarians were considered close relatives of humans in the ancient era, but they were mixed with the bloodline of an ancient beast. The barbarians' ancestors were a very strong race, but after several tens of thousands of years, the wild energy in the barbarians' blood became thinner and thinner, so this race became weaker and weaker. The barbarians were a rare race on the continent that relied on physical strength. Although they couldn't awaken their source spirit and weren't suited to cultivating any attributed cultivation techniques, the barbarians had a very strong life force. If they could cultivate a non-attributed cultivation technique and develop their physical strength to the peak, the barbarians would still be a strong race. The wild blood medicine was a special medicine that could cause a berserk reaction. What was berserk? Berserk was similar to demonic transformation. When the hell flames invaded Thunder State, the abyss aura caused a large amount of humans to be demonized. It made many weak or weak low-level cultivators suddenly turn into terrifying abyss demon soldiers that could threaten high-level cultivators. This was a result of the demonic transformation. Berserk and demonic transformation were the same, but the principle was different. Dark energy infecting a living being was the cause of the demonic transformation, but the berserk transformation was when the power of a fierce beast surged in, stimulating one's potential and fully developing one's physical strength. The demonic transformation was even more extreme, so it was basically irreversible. Although the berserk transformation was not as extreme as the demonic transformation, normal living beings would still pay a large price for going berserk. Berserk could increase one's strength by a large amount, but the price was losing one's rationality. They would become crazy and bloodthirsty, unable to differentiate between friend and foe. The berserk transformation would crazily kill everything they saw. There would be no pain, no fatigue, and finally they would die. The barbarians had a special physique and bloodline, so they were one of the few living beings that could undergo the berserk transformation. The berserk art was a cultivation technique made for the berserkers. Not only could it increase the berserker's potential, it could also suppress the berserker's berserk state, allowing the berserker to maintain a clear mind in battle. The most important thing was that with each berserk transformation, this cultivation technique would quickly evolve. When this terrifying super soldier type was created, Chu Tian would bring them to fight all over the place, allowing the berserkers to fight more often. This way, the berserker's strength would become higher and higher. Each berserker had a strong destructive might. Once they went berserk, they would not feel pain, fatigue, or fear. They were a group of killing machines that would never stop. This was a soldier type that could quickly level up. Gu Qianxiu began to transform the other 100 barbarians into berserkers. These barbarians were the elites of the barbarians. When they went berserk, they could instantly cripple a second to third awakened soul layer cultivator in close combat. If these warriors formed a large army in the future, they would become a sharp blade in Miracle Commerce's hands. They could be considered a trump card army in a warring kingdom. This was a high-level army that could grow. Chu Tian planned to create a berserker army in a month. The initial cost of creating these berserkers was not low, mainly because of the berserk blood potion. After the berserker army was formed, they would need the berserk blood potion to increase their strength. But compared to the value of the army, Miracle Commerce could accept this price. A strong army could not have strong equipment. Chu Tian specially ordered a set of equipment for the berserker army. First was the normal equipment and weapons. The barbarian warriors were very strong, so normal light armor and weapons were not suitable for them. Therefore, the berserker's basic equipment was a set of thick profound iron armor and a giant battle axe that weighed several hundred pounds. The equipment itself was made of level 3 metal with runes engraved on it, so normal awakened soul cultivators would find it hard to break it. If this equipment was worn by a human, they wouldn't be able to stand after a few steps, but to the berserkers, it was as light as a feather. A heavy, profound iron axe was swung with the strength of a barbarian soldier. It was heavy and could split mountains and rivers. If it was an army of tens of thousands of berserkers, it would be like building a steel wall on the battlefield. At least in the southern summer country, other than the Griffin Knights in the air, there was no other army that could break through this kind of defense. How could normal equipment be enough? This was Miracle Commerce's direct army. Chu Tian came to the weapons department of the Yun Sec's laboratory. How is the research on the source energy cannons? Yun Tianhe was working with a group of scholars and Meng Qingwu was helping out in the laboratory. She personally introduced it to Chu Tian. There are no results yet. The source energy cannons were one of the armies Chu Tian made for the berserkers. This kind of weapon was a compressed version of the source energy cannons. Although it didn't have the terrifying destructive power of the source energy cannons, it was much more portable. With the barbarian warriors' strength, they could carry it with them. With several dozen people equipped, they could easily break through the battlefield and provide a strong destructive power for the entire team. Although it was just a smaller version, it wasn't simple, so it was normal that it wasn't completed. What about the source energy swords? There are some results, but they can't be used. Through the window of a laboratory, Chu Tian could see a few researchers working on a strange weapon. This weapon looked like a small handle with a strong energy structure inside. The handle was a source energy array, and when the weapon was activated, a high heat energy beam came out of the handle. It looked like a flashlight, but the difference was that the beam that came out of the handle was solid. The high energy combined and formed a solid substance, so it had a terrifying temperature and could cut through steel like tofu. This was a basic close combat source energy weapon. Chu Tian had provided the blueprints and let the laboratory try to make it. From the looks of it, the results were not good enough and each energy sword was unstable. What are the main problems? The main problems are materials and energy. Meng Qingwu replied, most of our materials come from the southern summer country. Even if we use the highest grade materials, it is hard to bear the heat and energy produced when the energy swords are formed. Moreover, our energy batteries are not strong enough and the energy swords weaken after 10 seconds, so it is hard to keep the energy sword stable. When we were making the source energy cannons, we had already used up all of our high-grade metals. Chu Tian gave a sigh. There really was nothing perfect in this world. He was prepared to make 8,000 berserkers. Each berserker would wear heavy armor, a heavy axe, and they would be equipped with source energy grenades, source energy swords, individual cannons, and storm rifles, suitable for all kinds of situations. If he really had this kind of army, Chu Tian could directly charge into the Forest of Chaos and kill everyone. No matter how strong the locals were, could they block this kind of formation? Perhaps 100 storm rifles would be enough to make the locals run away like rats. We need large amounts of weapons. Meng Qingwu was very clear on Miracle Commerce's situation, especially the source energy cannons and storm rifles, these super strong weapons. Only, these weapons have very high requirements for materials. If the Southern Summer Country can't find this kind of, I'm afraid we will be stuck for a long time. Time is precious, we can't drag it out. Chu Tian said, from tomorrow onwards, we'll split up. You wouldn't be thinking of going to the Forest of Chaos first, right? Miracle Commerce was not prepared yet, so wouldn't going to the Forest of Chaos in a rush alert the enemy? The Eagle Burial Kingdom could make a move against the Southern Summer Country at any time, so Chu Tian had to prepare ahead of time. You'll stay in Southern State to take care of the infrastructure on the outer layer of the Forest of Chaos, as well as the recruitment of soldiers. I'll enter the Forest of Chaos. Relax, I'm going to find resources this time and ask around. I won't make this matter big. Meng Qingwu was a bit hesitant. I'm afraid it's too risky. I'll bring Vivian with me. Everything will be fine. Vivian's cultivation was deep and she had an innate spatial energy. Even if she met someone she couldn't beat, she would most likely be able to run away. So with Vivian by Chu Tian's side, Chu Tian would be very safe. Then it's like this. Meng Qingwu took over all the work and began to build the Berserker army. On the second day, Miracle Commerce brought out over 100 reborn barbarians. Each of them were equipped with powerful armor and weapons, and Meng Qingwu brought them to Barbarian City. Barbarian City was instantly filled with a large stir. The old chief never would have thought that after leaving for a few days, his clansmen would all become completely different people. Their strength had increased by at least 5-6 times. Any one of these 100 people would be a terrifying existence that an early or mid-awakened soul cultivator would find hard to deal with. What made the barbarians even more jealous was Southern State's Marquis Meng Qingwu announced. These over 100 people had officially joined Miracle Commerce and were now directly trained by Miracle Commerce. This was equal to receiving an iron rice bowl. Miracle Commerce was famous for their generous treatment. Other than that, each barbarian that became a berserker would not only gain strength, their families would also be taken care of by Miracle Commerce. The berserkers had signed a contract with Miracle Commerce. As long as they served for 5 years, they would no longer have their freedom. The berserkers had the right to withdraw from the army and return to the barbarian region to live. Miracle Commerce did not need to take the initiative to recruit soldiers. In just a few short days, several tens of thousands of young barbarians begged to become Miracle Commerce's soldiers. They would give you strength, freedom, and even take care of your family. To the barbarians, this was a chance to stand out. Of course, Miracle Commerce would not be polite. Meng Qingwu used her status as the Southern State's Marquis to announce that as long as they cultivated the Berserker art, they would be able to join Miracle Commerce's reserve army and receive the Berserker transformation. Once the news came out, in just 2 short days, the number of berserkers in the reserve army reached over 1,000. Miracle Commerce's large amounts of berserker medicine could barely keep up with the demand. However, with the increasing number of people in the reserve army and the running out of berserker medicine materials, this task could not be completed in a short period of time. Chapter 734. 5,000 dwarves were neatly standing in the main hall. Chu Tian sat high up and looked over, but he couldn't even tell if they were male or female, old or young. This was because the dwarves were all tall and had the same appearance. They had rich hair and their faces were covered in beards, which was the symbol of the dwarves. Even if they were male or female, they were the same. Other than that, they were less than 1.40 meters tall, but they grew horizontally, forming a triangle of muscles. Kill cannon. Kill cannon. Take back the Oldman mines. Take back the Oldman mines. The dwarves had already put on their armor and raised their weapons as they shouted a few words. Following this, all the wine and meat in the warehouse were brought out, letting the dwarves eat and drink to their heart's content. They were prepared to burn their boats and fight to the death. The dwarves were not a race that was easy to get along with. Not only did they have a fiery temper, they were also very stubborn. Once the dwarves decided on something, even the heavenly emperor would find it hard to change it. So once the dwarves held a grudge, it would be a lifelong grudge. Actually, anyone with a bit of a brain could understand that the Oldman mines could not stay any longer. Even if the dwarves took back the mines, they would not have the power to defend it. This 100-year-old mine was destined not to belong to the dwarves. How could these several thousand people defend their homeland? Would the dwarves leave? Impossible. Chu Tian understood these stubborn fellows. They knew that they would die if they stayed in the mines, so they were not willing to give the mines to others. However, this was an opportunity for Chu Tian. Chu Tian was very interested in the Oldman mines, and he was also very interested in the dwarves. This was because the dwarves that could survive were all elites of their tribes. Not to mention their battle strength, they were all experienced refining experts. Chu Tian was strictly a businessman, and the benefits these dwarves could create were very large. Miracle commerce was still lacking in material refining and production. If they could take this chance to swallow Oldman small town, wouldn't that make up for Miracle Commerce's shortcomings? Not bad, not bad. Swindling others, I'm the best at it. Vivian was eating her fruit when she found Chu Tian secretly laughing. What is Big Brother Chu Tian laughing about? Most likely you've thought of a plan to harm people. Meng Yingying acted like she understood Chu Tian the most. Vivian was shocked. Big Brother Chu Tian is a good person? How could he harm people? These words almost made the silent Chen Bingyu choke on the side. Was the little elf selectively blind? Not to mention far away, Chu Tian had destroyed the barbarians' homeland without leaving any leeway. In the end, the barbarians were singing his praises and crying tears of gratitude towards him. In the future, they would have to fight for him. Speaking of this, these barbarians had been miserably cheated. The dwarves beat the war drums. The chief personally put on his armor and led his clansmen out. Chu Tian came over and said to the four of them, "We should also go." The Oldman mine was at the end of a canyon. This canyon was very common in the forest, and if one flew down from the sky on a flying demon beast, it would be a very common terrain in the forest. There was nothing special about it at all. Who would have thought that there would be more than a dozen types of energy veins underground, and that a group of dwarves would be attracted to station here? There were several canyons in this area, and each canyon had many branches. Although the terrain was very common, the structure was very complex. The main entrance of the Oldman mine was just a very common mountain wall. Chu Tian looked in the distance and saw that the entire mountain wall was covered in vines and moss, even having a small waterfall hanging down. No matter how carefully he looked, he couldn't see a single trace. It was like a very common place. This is the Oldman mine. This wall has a mechanism designed by the dwarves. The dwarf chief said this and took out a foot-long stone key from his chest. The key's structure was very complex, and there were several different types of crystals embedded in it. As long as we insert the key in, the stone wall will automatically open. Dwarven brothers, let us kill our way in and take back our property and the mine. The dwarves were ready to charge in against a common enemy. Wait a minute. Chu Tian stopped the reckless dwarves. Cannon has several times more people than you. There is no chance of winning if you kill your way in. We have to fight even if we can't win. Dwarven brothers are not afraid of strong enemies. That's right, Dwarven brothers are not afraid of strong enemies. Even if we die, we have to kill Cannon. Don't be excited. Chu Tian said to the dwarves, since we aren't in a rush, why don't we wait a bit first? Let us sneak in and assassinate Cannon. This way, the spider army will be in chaos, and won't you have a better chance? Assassinate Cannon? The dwarf chief's face slightly changed. You can do it? Other than here, there is no other place we can go. Would I say something I couldn't do? Chu Tian first asked for a detailed map of the Oldman mine. When he looked over the environment of the Oldman mine, he couldn't help being amazed. The scale of this mine was very large. The dwarves had built a large underground palace inside. The design of the Oldman underground palace was very reasonable. The entire underground palace was divided into upper, middle, and lower levels. The excavation area and the refining area were at the bottom level, with 6 large dwarven mines and several dozen craftsmen's houses. The living area and storage area were in the middle level, with over 20,000 rooms and 15 streets. The top level was the breeding, cultivation, and activity area. There were over 800 houses here, as well as a special area for growing crops. The entire mine was in the shape of an inverted trapezoid. The higher the level, the larger the space. It could hold over 100,000 people at the same time. If they could solve the problem of food and living resources, even if 200,000–300,000 people lived inside, it would still be possible. How was this a mine? This was simply a small underground city. I want you to bring us in. Chu Tian gave the map to Vivian. Can you see if you can do it? Of course, there's no problem. Vivian stuck out her chest and confidently agreed, but she had a worry. Only I don't know the situation inside the mine and I don't know where Cannon will appear. If we teleport in and appear in the middle of a large group of enemies, wouldn't that be walking right into a trap? The little fox stretched out its head and it was unknown when a large jade ball had appeared in its hand. This was not a normal jade ball. There was a pupil on it that released an indescribable might. Stop showing off. Chu Tian directly slapped the little fox's butt. Get to work. The little fox gestured a few times with its claws. You little fellow, you're actually bargaining with me again. It's been too long since I've hit you. Are you itching for a beating? Chu Tian understood the little fox's style very well. This fellow would not do anything without benefits, so he could only agree, all right, I'll give you a portion of the benefits when the time comes. Vivian did not understand Chu Tian's pet too well. She only knew that this fellow had a bit of skill. Moreover, it was very intelligent and its intelligence was higher than a normal human's. The little fox obtained a satisfied answer and began to release its divine sense while holding the divine eye. After a few seconds, the little fox opened its eyes and those sparkling eyes released a glow. It immediately jumped onto Vivian's hand and used its claws to point out a location on the map. No problem. Vivian used her spatial energy to lock onto the location and brought everyone over one by one. Teleporting with people would consume a lot of energy, and if there were too many people, even she wouldn't be able to handle it. For people used up a third of their spirit energy, so she didn't dare bring more people in. The last one to enter was Meng Yingying. Meng Yingying felt the scenery around her change, and she suddenly appeared in a completely strange environment. All sides were sealed off and there were no lights, but it wasn't dark at all. Rather, it was very bright. Meng Yingying gently took a step forward. Hua! This was the sound of a bunch of silver jades colliding. It was very clear and sweet. Looking over, Meng Yingying was stunned. Because her 2 feet were stepping on a large silver river, she had accidentally kicked it, causing a large amount of metal to scatter, glowing like flowing water. Meng Yingying picked up a silver ingot. It was silvery white and glossy, covered in a faint light. This was obviously a type of energy metal similar to mithril. The entire ground was covered in this type of metal. When she looked around, she was shocked to find that this spectacular silver river was only a small stream. Everywhere around her were piles of various materials. Most of them were metal materials, and most of them were level 3 and above high-grade materials. This is too much. Meng Yingying excitedly said to Chu Tian, this is exactly what miracle commerce is lacking. If we take these materials, we can immediately make weapons. There were so many high-grade metal materials here. How many storm rifles and source energy cannons could they be made? Miracle Commerce's technology would all experience a leap forward. Come back for me. Chu Tian grabbed the little fox's tail and pulled it out from the pile of treasures. You little fellow, I finally understand why you chose this place. The little fox's mouth was filled with gold essence and it swallowed it all into its stomach. Then it turned into a gray fog. Chu Tian felt his hands become empty as the little fox jumped several meters away. With a speed visible to the naked eye, the little fox swallowed the entire mountain of gold. Little fox, why are you so disobedient? Meng Yingying was a bit puzzled. This is all metal, can you even digest it after swallowing it? The little fox looked at Meng Yingying with disdain. You can even ask such a stupid question? This fox doesn't need this scrap metal, but master needs it. Then this fox will first store a portion in my stomach and wait for a good price. When the time comes, I'll be able to fiercely rip off master. This bastard would tear the roof tiles if he wasn't beaten for 3 days. This damned fox really needs to be taught a good lesson. How could this little fox be caught that easily? Chu Tian was brought everywhere by it, but he couldn't catch it at all. The treasure room's doors suddenly opened. What's going on? Why is there a sound coming from inside? A few strange, sapient species walked into the storage room. They looked like a mix of humans and spiders. Their upper bodies were similar to humans, but their lower bodies had the 8 legs of spiders. They walked very fast and each leg was like a steel blade. Spider race, a kind of spirit insect. Chapter 735. The Forest of Chaos did not have 4 seasons, there was only a rainy season and a dry season. It was the Forest of Chaos rainy season right now. The warm and humid air flowed from the west coast to the mountain range, covering the entire Forest of Chaos. The fertile soil and sparse population made it very easy to obtain food, and there were many varieties to choose from. Whether it was spirit beasts, elves, or even ogres, as long as they found a piece of land and scattered their seeds, they would be able to harvest many delicious fruits in the coming year without any cultivation. There was no kingdom, no law, and no order here. People did not need to pay taxes and they did not need to bow down to anyone. As long as they were strong enough, there would be endless resources in the forest. This was a paradise for experts. It was a hell for the weak. The rich and complex environment gave birth to all kinds of life. From the ancient species to the rare beasts of the modern era, from the ancient dragons to the elegant elves, they all regarded the Forest of Chaos as their ideal home. Although the resources here could support 100 times the population, it was hard to not have fights where there was life. Humans fighting with humans, humans fighting with beasts, and beasts fighting with beasts were already the most common scenes in the forest. Desires were endless. For example, the Dragon Lord. This giant dragon had lived for thousands of years and occupied the noble dragon city. It was said that his wealth could be piled into the heavens. However, he was still not satisfied with this. He would plunder large amounts of wealth from the subordinate cities every year. The giants of the giant mountain range, they emptied 100 miles of mountains and built the largest palaces in the Forest of Chaos. The treasures inside were coveted by countless experts of the continent. The Elven King ruled the Elven Council, controlling several dozen elven cities and working with several small and medium-sized races, becoming one of the strongest powers in the forest. They controlled countless ancient knowledge and wisdom. The beautiful sea race queen built a city in the sea, stretching from the far west coast to the center of the Forest of Chaos. She wanted to take all the treasures of the sea and land into her hands. There were countless of these powers that were not weaker than peak warring kingdoms. They wildly explored the Forest of Chaos, endlessly fighting and killing. The powers intertwined with each other and the Forest of Chaos was in chaos. Heroes rose together, the strong contended, the weak could only choose to be vassals, and even more of the weak tried their best to hide themselves, maintaining the laws of the dark forest. No one knew just how many unknown secrets and strengths were hidden in this primitive forest. The Forest of Chaos, the outer region. This place was not strongly affected by the rainy season, but it was still warm and humid. This was a barbaric land with a low degree of development. The roots of the giant trees were everywhere, there were all kinds of fungi and plants, and there were countless poisonous snakes, insects, and flowers. It was like every corner was filled with a fatal danger. In the middle of this dense forest, there was a large open space. This looked like a demon beast's nest. There were several dozen giant lizards lying here, and each one was releasing a terrifying aura. They were covered in emerald green scales that glowed like they were made of emerald. There was a spring filled with life energy in the center of these lizards. When soaked in this aura, the demon beasts could grow without hunting. Rustle, rustle, rustle. There was suddenly movement in the forest. The giant lizard smelled the scent and stood up. It let out a low, warning growl towards the forest. The bushes full of berries suddenly shook a few times, and a few extremely sharp sword cheese shot out. In an instant, the beautiful scales of the giant lizard were shattered, and several lizards were injured. Roar! The lizards angrily counterattacked. They opened their huge mouths but didn't spit out anything. Instead, the roots and bushes on the ground seemed to be hit by some kind of energy. They all broke apart and scattered into the air. Each fragment looked like it had been twisted. 5 people wearing travelers' cloaks appeared in their field of vision. Although they were 5 inconspicuous humans, the lizards felt a dangerous aura and immediately attacked as a group. Who knew that at this moment, one of them waved his hand and cut open the space in front of him. The invisible energy that the lizards shot over was all swept into the spatial crack. Boom! The scales on the lizards' bodies instantly exploded and all the energy fell on their bodies. The leader of the lizards was extremely angry. Its strong limbs kicked the ground and it suddenly pounced at the 3 people. At this time, a little white fox jumped out and its small body suddenly changed, turning into a giant monster fox. When the monster fox stared at it with a strange gaze, the lizard king instantly froze in place. Then it suddenly turned around and attacked the other lizards. Another person jumped out. A cold wave came out and froze a lizard into an ice sculpture. Another person conjured a giant sword and sliced the ice sculpture into pieces. There was no suspense in this battle. The 10 lizards were not weak, but they were still level 2 demon beasts. There were a few strong ones that were in the 7th or 8th awakened soul layer, and the weakest of these humans was in the 7th awakened soul layer. There was even an elf that had the strength of a true soul cultivator. That's right. These 5 travelers were not others, they were Chu Tian's group. Meng Yingying took out a whistle and forcefully blew it. The surrounding forest began to tremble and a large group of people charged out. When these people saw the lizard corpses on the ground, they all began to cheer in pleasant surprise. The village chief gave the 10 sacred herbs to Chu Tian. This was their thanks to Chu Tian's group. This life essence water originally belonged to their village, but it had been forcefully taken by a group of lizards that passed by. The village had tried to attack them several times, but they had suffered heavy casualties and returned without any results. Today they had met 5 outsiders that were willing to help, so everything that had just happened. They never thought about it. Just by casually eradicating a nest of lizards, they could actually obtain so many precious herbs, and this was only from an unknown small village. The Forest of Chaos was rich in resources. It was not something the southern summer country could compare to. That night, the spirit beasts had already lit a bonfire. Those large pieces of juicy lizard meat were all placed on the fire with iron rods. The fragrant fat continued to drip into the fire, making a sizzling sound. The rabbit people were dancing around the bonfire. Each one of them had a look of joy on their faces. Several cute rabbit race girls were carrying good quality lizard meat as they blushed shyly and delivered it to Chu Tian. Their eyes were filled with hints. If there was a need, they were willing to provide some special services. There were no moral restrictions in the Forest of Chaos, and the spirit beasts were like this. Chu Tian looked at the rabbit race girls with interest. From their appearance, the rabbit race people were in line with human aesthetics. They were not covered in fur like some spirit beasts. The spirit beasts had many human characteristics, only having rabbit tails, ears, and etc. The rabbit race had quite a bit of foreign beauty. These rabbit race girls were clearly specially chosen by the village chief to curry favor with them. Chu Tian left a few rabbit race girls to drink with them, while also asking around for information. Meng Yingying used the prepared source energy barbecue array to reheat the meat. The taste of this meat isn't bad. Is that so? I think it's a bit old. They ate until their mouths were covered in oil, and the little fox had already eaten several dozen kilograms of barbecue meat. They were surrounded by rabbit race people, delicious barbecue meat, unique fruit wine, and primitive village. All of this had a special flavor. In short, it was something that couldn't be felt in a human country. They brought a total of 5 people this time. Chen Bingyu, Dongfang Haoren, and Vivian, These three were either bodyguards or guides. As for Meng Yingying, she was just here to play. Chu Tian was already a high-level awakened soul cultivator at the 8th awakened soul layer. Meng Yingying had broken through to the 7th awakened soul layer 2 days ago, only a bit later than Nangong Yun and faster than Meng Qinggu and the others. Because of Vivian's strong request, Chu Tian brought her along as a reward for her hard work in cultivation. In a few days, everyone was only at the edge of the forest. The forest of chaos was too large. It was several dozen times larger than the southern summer country. Although this area was mainly covered in forest, it was not completely covered in forest. There were also deserts, beaches, swamps, and other areas. Other than that, the population density of the forest of chaos could not compare to the southern summer country, but the demon beast density was several times that of the southern summer country. It was because the forest of chaos was too large. Vivian was not clear on the situation here, so she could only talk about the large powers. As for the other small powers and hidden powers, not to mention her who rarely went out, even an elven elder wouldn't be able to explain them. Meng Yingying took a bite of roasted meat. How can we establish ourselves in the forest? Is there a need to say? Of course it's to steal a city. Vivian said without even thinking. The forest of chaos has tens of thousands of cities, and most of these cities are built in places with the richest spiritual veins, the most resources, and the safest environments. As long as we can steal a city, we can become a lord and develop our influence through managing the city. For a small village like this, there is a lot of mobility. It won't be able to grow. Meng Yingying found this very interesting. Then what are we waiting for? Can't we just directly steal it? Chu Tian rolled his eyes. If stealing a city was that easy, the forest of chaos would have already been unified by others. That's right, that's right. Vivian nodded in agreement. The forest of chaos is much larger than the southern summer country. Any random forest city would have quite a few true spirit cultivators guarding it. If we want to capture this city, the difficulty would not be lower than capturing the southern summer imperial city. Meng Yingying was secretly speechless. Any random city in the forest of chaos had this kind of shocking strength? With Miracle Commerce's current strength, they really couldn't steal it. Even if they did, they wouldn't be able to defend it. After all, in this chaotic area, the hundreds of races were very chaotic. Vivian said with a sigh, "It's a pity that I'm not an adult yet, otherwise I could ask Royal Father to give me an elven city." Pooh! They almost spat out the food in their mouths. Chu Tian also looked at Vivian with a face of surprise. Although he knew that Vivian's status was not low, he never thought it would be this high. Could it be that her father really was the Elven King? Chapter 736. The spider people were half human and half spider, but one shouldn't think that their upper bodies were exactly the same as humans. In fact, even if the spider people ignored their lower bodies and compared their human-like upper bodies, they were still two completely different races from humans. First, they didn't have mouths and only had mouthparts similar to arthropods. Two poisonous pincers came out of their mouths, making them look very fierce. The spider people also had insect compound eyes, with a total of 4. Their hair was ash gray and was rather sparse. Just from the description, one could imagine how ugly this creature was. Of course, ugly was relative. After all, using a human sense of beauty to judge was a very narrow matter. Weren't humans ugly in the eyes of the spirit insects? 6 of the spider people's 8 legs were slender, like steel blades. The first 2 were very thick, able to easily dig through the ground. Actually, the spider race was a very common race among the spirit insects. They were cunning, sharp, and cruel. They were proficient in setting traps and using poison, so most of them were experienced hunters. A strange sound from the storage room attracted the attention of the guards. Several spider people opened the door and came in to patrol. Those steel blade-like legs stepped on the metal on the ground, letting out a clear grinding sound. Actually, the spider people's legs were special. Not only could they easily dig through the ground, they could also absorb spirit energy, allowing them to stand on walls and even walk on the ceiling. No matter what kind of terrain it was, it could not stop the spider people. Other than that, the spider people's legs were covered in fine hairs. These hairs were not decorations, they were covered in the spider people's unique spirit energy. This spirit energy could be transmitted several meters away, and even the slightest vibration could not escape the sharp senses of the spider people. Several spider people looked around, but they didn't find anything strange. Could it be that they were thinking too much? When the spider people were filled with doubt, their sensitive bodies suddenly felt a very slight vibration, as if there was a sound coming from under their feet. When the several spider people lowered their heads, the metal ingots under their feet were frozen by the blue and white frost. By the time they felt that something was wrong, it was already too late. The cold current quickly gushed out, and the several spider people didn't even have time to react before they were instantly frozen into ice sculptures. Chu Tian used his sword to hit each ice sculpture, and they instantly shattered into pieces. Hurry up! The little fox was a bit unwilling to take out the eyeball. Its divine sense spread out with the divine vision, and everything in the Oldman mine, even the most inconspicuous detail, could not escape its eyes. In the second floor of the palace, there was a tall and strong spider person. He was currently sleeping in a large amount of dwarf treasures, only revealing half of his body. This spider person was not the same as the others. Although his body was also half spider and half human, his body was around twice the size of a normal spider person. The skin on his upper body was dark green, and the surface of his body was covered in strange totems and runes. He was wearing a gorgeous armor and a purely decorative cloak. There was also a 3-meter-long spear beside him. That's right, it had to be the spider count cannon. Cannon was sleeping soundly, but the pillars around the palace were covered in dense spider silk webs. When the little fox's divine sense entered the palace, almost all the spider's silk began to tremble. This tremble followed the pillars and the ground, finally being sensed by Cannon's leg. Cannon stood up from the countless treasures, and his ugly spirit insect face was filled with vigilance. Divine sense? Someone is using their divine sense to spy on this place. There's a mouse that snuck in. When he heard the leader's voice, in an instant, several hundred elite spider race warriors charged in. Search! Cannon angrily roared. It should be nearby. Have everyone gather here, we have to find the mouse for me. Almost in an instant, several thousand spider race people began to move. They used their high senses and speed to quickly search around the hall for the intruder. The little fox put away its eyeball and quickly gestured to Chu Tian. Vivian asked, "Have you found it?" "We found it, but it's a bit bad. We've already been discovered." "What? How did they find us?" Chu Tian never thought that the spider race would have this kind of special ability. Not only could their spider silk sense normal vibrations and energy changes, they could even sense divine sense scanning. This was very rare. Cannon has gathered his army. It's impossible for us to sneak attack. The entire mine is filled with spider race people searching, and once they find our location, we won't be able to complete our mission. Everyone's faces slightly sunk. Although the 5 of them were very strong, they couldn't resist the attacks of tens of thousands of people. Not to mention that from the dwarf's description, Cannon himself was a true spirit realm expert. They thought that with Vivian's spatial abilities, this assassination would be very easy, but who would have thought that something like this would happen? It seemed like they had underestimated these insects. Meng Yingying nervously asked, "What do we do?" "This matter is a bit troublesome, but there's no need to worry." Chu Tian maintained his calm. Actually, there was nothing to be afraid of. The little fox can release its divine sense through the divine eye, so it can jump to any spatial location. This is different from radiating divine sense from a person. Cannon's search will be fruitless, so his people will spread to other areas. When the number of troops decreases, we'll make our move at that time. All right. It was just like Chu Tian had guessed. Cannon thought that the intruder was nearby or even in the palace, so he gathered several thousand people to search every corner, not letting go of a single corner. The spider people had a strong perception, and with this many people searching, even if the other side had a powerful concealment technique, they would not be able to hide. However, no matter how the spider people searched, they couldn't find the other side. This made Cannon a bit uneasy. Could it be that the other side had already escaped when they were discovered? This place was heavily guarded both inside and outside. If they could escape from this kind of defense, they would not be ordinary people. Sly mice. Cannon was a bit restless. Search. We have to find them even if we have to dig 3 feet into the ground. I don't believe that they can disappear into thin air. Cannon ordered the spider army to scatter and search, but he placed spider webs around the palace and every entrance. This way, they could prevent the other side from sneaking back and attacking. No matter how skilled they were in stealth, they couldn't just pass through walls, right? Even if they passed through walls, the slightest change in energy would be captured by the spider webs. Not to mention that Cannon was very cautious. On one hand, he had sent people to search, but on the other hand, he had left 1 to 200 elites by his side. This was enough to deal with any sudden situations. Cannon could not understand, why would someone run in here? Just as he was feeling confused, the spider webs around him began to tremble again. This time, it was not a divine sense scan, but a violent energy disturbance. An incomparably sharp energy directly repelled all the other energies in this space, forcibly tearing open the space. Not good. Spatial energy. Cannon was shocked. Be careful, there's an assassin. Vivian tore open a spatial passage and several people charged out. Over 100 spider bodyguards surrounded Cannon, so Vivian raised her blade and sent out a spatial slash. Over a dozen bodyguards were sliced in half at the waist. This kind of spatial attack could not be defended against at all. Because a slash formed from spatial distortions, it was an attack launched from the spatial layer. No matter how dense or sturdy a material was, it could not resist this kind of tearing. Cannon quickly released his spirit energy, attempting to use his energy to disturb the surrounding space and reduce the success rate of the spatial attack. He loudly shouted, "Kill them!" The spider bodyguards brandished their weapons and charged forward. Chen Bingyu and Dongfang Haoren charged out from the left and right, instantly sending several dozen spider bodyguards flying. Cannon felt that something was wrong. These people were very strong and the bodyguards could not stop them, so he had to call for more troops. He released some energy into several strands of spider silk, and the energy was immediately sent to all parts of the spider silk. Almost all the spider people received this urgent message and immediately rushed towards the main hall. There was the sound of the spider army charging in all directions. In at most a few seconds, this place would be surrounded. Meng Yingying quickly shouted, "Vivian, quickly kill him!" Vivian sent out a spatial slash and Cannon's energy had already filled the surroundings. Although his cultivation couldn't stop the spatial attack from forming, he could still slow down the speed of the spatial slash. Cannon pulled back in time and dodged the attack, but one of his legs was cut off. "Consider yourself lucky." Vivian gave a snort and began to condense more spirit energy. Cannon was a true spirit expert, but he was only in the first true spirit layer. This elf with spatial energy was at least in the third true spirit layer, so she was definitely not his match. She had to quickly run. Pooh! Cannon spat out a large cloud of poison mist and was about to retreat. Flame Demon Transformation. Chu Tian turned into the Flame Demon Transformation and entered his second state. Like a sharp meteor, he chased after Cannon and slashed out with a flaming sword. Seeking death. Cannon could feel Chu Tian's aura. This person's cultivation was around the 8th awakened soul layer. Even if he used a strange secret technique and was not weaker than a peak 9th awakened soul layer expert, trying to block a true spirit cultivator was still overestimating himself. He casually sent out a spear. Who would have thought that when Chu Tian sent out a full strength slash, he would release the demon god sword source spirit. This source spirit that was close to the god level immediately increased the might of the sword glow by several times. Ding! A crack appeared on Chu Tian's starlight barrier and he was sent flying several meters. Cannon only took a step back and revealed a look of disbelief. Although it was true that Cannon had the upper hand, with his trivial awakened soul realm strength, forcing back a true spirit cultivator, this was an impossible matter. After Chu Tian's cultivation base increased, this was the first time he made a move, so he was satisfied. Cannon's cultivation base was only a bit weaker than Malam's. Being able to fight this kind of opponent without being injured, This was enough to make Chu Tian in the 8th awakened soul layer feel proud. This did not mean that Chu Tian had a chance of winning. If he didn't use the power of his main source spirit, Chu Tian would not be able to last more than 10 rounds. But this was not important. Chu Tian did not need to personally fight with him, it was enough as long as he could stop Cannon. Vivian's explosive power turned into a dozen spatial slashes that descended at the same time. No! Cannon gave a pitiful cry as he was cut into several dozen pieces. Any protective spirit energy or defensive cultivation technique was useless as he was cut into pieces like tofu. Chapter 737. So what if Vivian could come to a city? The elves were xenophobic, especially afraid of humans. They would not allow humans to live in the city and they would not allow humans to manage the city. Letting Chu Tian live in the elven city was a kind of restriction. The Forest of Chaos environment was different from the southern summer country. If one didn't have a strong enough fist, they wouldn't be able to protect it no matter how many they had. This was also the reason why Chu Tian was not in a rush to find allies in the forest. In this chaotic and disorderly place, they would make a move if they wanted to. As long as there was profit to be made, there would be no reason at all. Honored guests. The rabbit race village chief walked over with a cane. He was a bit afraid, but he respectfully said, "You've taken back the spring water for the village, we are very grateful to you. Is there anything we can help you with?" The rabbit race was a kind of spirit beast, but they were a low-class spirit beast race. The spirit beasts were one of the most complex races on the continent. The humans had dwarves, barbarians, and giants, and the elves had forest elves, snow elves, flame elves, and other differences. However, there had never been a race like the spirit beasts that had several hundred branches, with each branch being an independent species. This was truly incredible. The special characteristic of the spirit beasts was that the higher the level of the spirit beast, the more violent they were, and the lower the level of the spirit beast, the more docile they were. The rabbit race was a race that did not like fighting because they were weak, so the rabbit race relied on higher-level races to survive. There weren't many independent rabbit race villages like this, and once they were targeted by hunters or demon beasts from other races, they would immediately be exterminated. The rabbit race did not have anything and their civilization was very backward. They didn't even understand source energy arrays, not to mention alchemy. The spring of life was the foundation of the rabbit race's survival. Chu Tian's group had helped them take back the spring of life from the demon beasts. This was a large favor to the rabbit race. The only thing the rabbit race was worried about was that they had other plans. If these people had bad intentions, this village would not be able to be kept. All the rabbit race members had to leave as soon as possible to avoid a disaster. We are just a few normal adventurers. We came to the Forest of Chaos this time to buy some materials. However, we are not familiar with the Forest of Chaos, so where can we buy materials from? We will need the village chief's advice. They didn't have enough strength, so being low-key wasn't a bad thing. Chu Tian had already thought of a goal in coming to the Forest of Chaos. He just wanted to find a suitable source for miracle commerce and supply them with high-level materials to satisfy the source energy weapons production. He would not participate in the chaotic battles of the Forest of Chaos for now. Stealing a city to build a gang? Forget it. With their current strength, any random tribe would be able to cripple miracle commerce. Haste makes waste, he would first create a berserker army. Around 100 miles from here, there is a small settlement. It is a temporary small town, and if the nearby villages need to exchange for supplies, they will all be done in this small town. The rabbit race village chief let out a sigh of relief. Although this small town isn't big, there are quite a few forest specialties. Even if you can't find anything Sir is satisfied with, it is quite convenient to obtain information there. A temporary small town? Chu Tian could understand this. The small races of the Forest of Chaos and even the medium-sized powers were all forced to follow the Dark Forest Law. So the Dark Forest Law was not hard to understand. It meant that in a dark forest, there were countless hunters. These hunters could all become each other's prey, so it was necessary to hide in this kind of environment. Once they were exposed, it was very risky. Not only would it attract the attacks of other hunters, it would also attract the attention of other giants. There would be the danger of being swallowed up or even being exterminated. Therefore, if the small and medium-sized races wanted to develop in the Forest of Chaos, they had to follow this law. Because they didn't dare expose themselves, how could they exchange for supplies from the outside world? This kind of temporary small town was a method. When the villages needed supplies, they would disguise themselves and come to the small town. After exchanging for what they needed, they would immediately leave this place, not daring to stay too long to avoid attracting the attention of others. Since they had obtained some information, they would set off. "Sir, please wait." The rabbit race village chief could see that Chu Tian was the leader of this group. He gently clapped his hands and several well-developed rabbit race beauties came out. These rabbit race girls had all washed themselves and their watery eyes stared at Chu Tian. What is the meaning of this? These are the 10 most beautiful girls in the village. They are all virgins. They are now offered to Sir and will become Sir's personal maids. The rabbit race is gentle and warm. They will definitely serve Sir well. Fuck, it can't be. Chu Tian was a bit stunned. The rabbit race looked a bit strange. After all, they were not the same race as humans. However, from a human's point of view, the rabbit race girls were petite and well-developed with gentle bodies. They were the best choice for maids. In the human world, a beautiful rabbit girl could sell for a high price, not to mention a virgin. But Chu Tian could clearly feel that there was a sharp gaze staring at him. Even Chen Bingyu was silently looking at him and Vivian was frowning. How could he take this? Chu Tian righteously refused. How could I, Chu Tian, be someone who is lustful and tramples on others? I appreciate the village chief's good intentions, but I cannot accept this kind of gift. The rabbit race village chief said, "No, this is their honor. I hope Sir will not refuse." These words were not a lie as the rabbit race girls revealed looks of desire. They lived in the Forest of Chaos, living in precarious situations every day. If they were taken in as maids by an expert, it would be like flying up a branch and turning into a phoenix. Not to mention that this human was in line with the rabbit race's point of view. It was much better than those fierce-looking tigers and bears. From the perspective of the rabbit race, they could use this to monitor Chu Tian. If Chu Tian went back and spread the location of the rabbit race's village, these rabbit girls could run back and report, protecting the safety of the village. In a place like the Forest of Chaos, they had to be careful. "Village chief, don't force us. The small town is very dangerous. It isn't safe for us to bring the rabbit girls." Meng Yingying suddenly stood up and said, "Leave them here first and we'll take them when we have a chance." That's it. The rabbit race village chief saw that the other side didn't want them and his heart couldn't help feeling a bit disappointed. Was not being greedy for small benefits really noble, or was he preparing to be greedy for more? It really was hard to predict whether this was a blessing or a curse. The rabbit race village chief looked at Meng Yingying, Vivian, and Chen Bingyu for a few seconds, but this person had so many beauties by his side. Perhaps he really didn't like the commoners of the rabbit village, so he could only comfort himself like this. Chu Tian left the small village. Meng Yingying gave 2 coughs and said, "The 10 beautiful maids are gone. Are you disappointed?" "How could that be? Am I, Chu Tian, this kind of person? I am a free love advocate. This kind of transaction needs the location of the sword art." "Who knows what you're thinking?" Meng Yingying rolled her eyes. She looked at the rabbit village covered in a weak flame and sighed, "But these rabbit people are quite pitiful. They are clearly so weak, but they have to live in such a dangerous environment. Perhaps they will be discovered or destroyed sooner or later. But it's really strange. The Forest of Chaos is clearly rich in resources, so why are they fighting each other? The Forest of Chaos has always been like this. It's either you destroy me or I destroy you." Vivian was already used to it. It's hard for small tribes and small powers to survive. As long as they are targeted by a stronger power, they will be attacked for no reason at all. Meng Yingying said to Chu Tian, "Hey, since this place is this chaotic, why don't you just unify it and let these weak races survive?" "Damn, look at your tone, it's like it's easy. Not to mention the others, what do we do with the Dragon Lord?" The weapons Chu Tian could make now wouldn't even be able to harm a single one of his scales, not to mention the Elven King, the Titan, the Beast King, and the Sea King, all these powerful existences. But Chu Tian was not a cowardly person. He immediately patted his chest and said, "Since it's Yingying's orders, I'll do my best to complete it." Meng Yingying revealed a sweet smile, feeling very satisfied in her heart. Since Chu Tian said this, there was definitely no problem. There was nothing he couldn't do in this world. Vivian was very envious of Yingying and Chu Tian's relationship. Chu Tian was the person she admired the most. When the five of them set out, it was already midnight. Traveling through the forest at night was a big taboo because most demon beasts wanted to roam at night. However, Chu Tian was very bold and he did not think that there would be anything that could threaten him in the Forest of Chaos. The Lost Forest was filled with large amounts of fireflies, sunlight vines, glowing grass, fluorescent mushrooms, and etc. They automatically emitted light at night. Although it wasn't bright, it wasn't to the point where one couldn't see their fingers in front of them. Of course, not all things that emitted light were good. There were some demons and monsters that emitted beautiful lights and illusions to confuse people's hearts, finally luring their prey into a trap. This was a beautiful and magical scene, but there were dangers lurking everywhere. The sounds of insects were gloomy and there were demon beast roars coming from unknown places. The five of them didn't stop for a second. Although they were attacked several times along the way, they passed through without any danger. They finally arrived at their destination in the early morning. The morning glow fell into the forest like a flame and the pale golden sun covered the small town of Sardo, quietly standing in the small valley in the dense forest. If it wasn't for the rabbit race's village chief's reminder, even if they passed by, they wouldn't know that there was a small town like this. It was hidden very well and was covered in green vines, almost merging with the forest. Sardo meant forest house in the spirit beast language, so most of the people in this small town were spirit beasts. The small town had no guards or a mayor. In this place where laws were worse than dog shit, strength was everything. Whoever had the hardest fist could do whatever they wanted. What made Chu Tian very surprised was that although it was small, it had everything. There were only a few thousand people in the small town, there were taverns, grocery stores, and all kinds of shops, but those that could live here were not easy to deal with. For example, the owner of the Alchemist Hall, he was a fugitive from the great Zhou country. This person was proficient in alchemy and had refined poison to kill 300 enemies. He escaped from the great Zhou country to the Forest of Chaos and lived in this small town, becoming one of the few humans here. He had been doing very well these past few years. Because alchemists were very rare here, every important person in the village needed to find him to treat them when they were sick. Therefore, in just a few short years, this fellow had recruited many female apprentices and they were all high-quality goods. The female apprentices only learned some simple knowledge of herbs. They could help in the day and they could be used at night. If a customer liked them, of course they were welcome to use them. Only there would be a special service charge when the medical fees were paid, sometimes it was even more than their regular income. These girls did not have any property and they had to endure being trampled and tortured all day, but they were very satisfied with their master and their current life. If it wasn't for their master having a bit of status, how could they work together and live safely? After all, the lives of slaves were no different than insects. Chapter 738. Canon was a peak expert that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the refined ruler and the burning sun ruler, but in a place like the Forest of Chaos, he could only be considered a third-rate expert. The Warhound's Kingdom's Fong King with his third true spirit layer cultivation was not Vivian's match, so there was no suspense in this battle from the start. Chu Tian could have just sent Vivian out because of the Void Escaping's special property. As long as the attack did not exceed a certain threshold, it would be useless against Vivian no matter how many attacks there were. Therefore, as long as the little fox found Canon's position, Vivian would have a chance to kill him by herself. This was not a very hard or dangerous task. Of course, in order to prevent Canon from using special methods to escape, the dwarves would think that Chu Tian was willing to risk his life to help them. In order to kill more enemies and create more chaos, Chu Tian still brought the others with him. After all, there was a large difference between helping others with a slight effort and risking one's life in the eyes of the dwarves. Vivian's spatial attacks consumed a lot of energy, so she was not good at group fights. She could only be responsible for beheading or attacking important targets. In terms of the number of enemies she could kill, she couldn't even compare to Qinbingyu. The Count is dead. The Count is dead. When the sword Taoist cannon was cut to pieces, the entire spider army fell into chaos. The spider race's ability to send information through spider silk was very useful, but it could cause trouble sometimes. For example, when panic broke out, it could add fuel to the fire. The spider army was at least in the 9th body refinement layer, and their overall battle strength was even stronger than the southern summer country's storm cavalry. The mines were filled with traps left by the spider race and the defenses left by the dwarves. If this army could calm down and rely on their current advantages, they might not be able to defend themselves. But in a world where there was a large disparity in individual strength, the strongest person was not just the leader of the army. In a sense, they were the spiritual pillars, so the death of a leader was a destructive blow to morale. Kill, disrupt their troops. Chu Tian did not need to give any orders. Chen Bingyu and Dongfang Haoren charged out like two meteors. Two peak 9th awakened soul layer experts, two people with strong innate talents and strong defenses. Unless they met a true spirit realm expert, it would be hard for them to be defeated before they ran out of spirit energy. The spirit insects did not have the courage of the spirit beasts. They wildly killed over 400-500 people and used up half of their spirit energy, causing their offense to weaken. Only after the spider army generals adjusted the situation and began to resist and attack. But the resistance had not even begun yet. Damn insects! I'll let you feel the rage of the dwarves. The angry dwarves pushed open the gates. With the support of their homeland, the dwarves wildly and fiercely attacked the spider army. The spider army's attention was attracted by Chu Tian's group. Large groups of dwarves suddenly attacked from behind, catching the spider army off guard. Panic filled the air again. The spider army's morale completely collapsed and they couldn't gather it again. If it was just a few experts, as long as they used up all their spirit energy, they could win. Now that there were thousands of dwarves attacking, the spider army still had the advantage in terms of overall strength, but their fighting spirit was completely different. The mines were the dwarves' homeland, the inheritance of their ancestors, and the foundation of their lives. It was worth risking one's life for. To the spider army, it was just a stolen territory. Their leader was dead and the territory had no meaning, so they didn't need to sacrifice their lives for it. Finally, when the battle ended, less than a third of the spider army escaped and the rest were killed by the dwarves in the mines. The dwarves paid less than a tenth of their casualties and obtained such a glorious result, all because of the help of these 5 outsiders. The dwarves were honest. Of course they wouldn't go back on their word. The dwarf chief led several elders to express their sincere thanks to Chu Tian before immediately saying, "We've checked the warehouse. The dwarves' weapons and equipment were all stolen by those damn fellows." The dwarf chief felt his heart ache when he said this. Those were the best items made by 2-3 generations of the dwarves and now they were all stolen. How could they not feel pain? There are most of the materials left and according to the agreement, half of it will be used to pay the commission. This is what you should receive. There was a piece of information in the dwarf's words. Cannon took away all the equipment made by the dwarves? Chu Tian emphasized this question. Of course he believed the dwarves because the dwarves would not lie. This means that there is a large influence hiding behind Cannon. What are the dwarves prepared to do after taking back the Oldman mines? It wasn't a possibility, it was a certainty. No matter who is behind the scenes, the dwarves have no fear. The dwarf chief's voice was like a sacred oath. The tenacious dwarves are willing to bleed to the last drop of blood for our homeland. Truly a one-track mind, this fellow was hopeless. Chu Tian probingly said, "Actually I have an idea. If the dwarves can accept it, perhaps we can protect our homeland and even make the Oldman mines more prosperous than before." The dwarves were a bit in disbelief. "I have never lied to people and I will not lie to the friendly dwarves." Chu Tian revealed a smile and his sincere eyes were clearer than the moon spring. I think that the dwarves' minds have already been exposed. I wonder if the chief agrees? The chief silently agreed. Now there were at least 7-8 powers that knew the exact location of the mines. Chu Tian continued to say, according to the Dark Forest rules, the Oldman Mines is like a bonfire in the dark forest, so it will attract countless hunters. The enemies are in the dark and the dwarves are in the light, so we can only passively take a beating. We can't take the initiative to attack and we can't take the initiative to attack. Does the chief agree with this? The chief silently agreed again. The dwarves are not willing to give up, but they don't want to be exterminated. This is a very difficult matter to achieve. After all, to protect our homeland, just relying on courage and determination is not enough. Chu Tian poured a bucket of cold water on the dwarves before finally saying his own thoughts. Since the situation won't get any worse, why don't we open up the information about the mines and take the initiative to bring in other powers? We'll unite with other small powers and create another Oldman small town? You have to know that the Oldman mines have already been plundered once. Now that the location of the mines is revealed, it will help protect the small town. This is because it's not only you who have to follow the Dark Forest's rules. The Oldman mines had already been exposed. Any weak power in the Dark Forest's rules had to hide themselves. Once they were exposed, there was no way they could escape. They could either move away or wait for death. If the dwarves stubbornly chose to defend it, they would be swallowed sooner or later. Now Chu Tian's words moved the dwarves a bit. The location of the Oldman mines had already been exposed. Since it was like this, why didn't they just give up and expose it, letting all the large and small powers in the forest know? Chu Tian continued to patiently guide him. The Oldman clan is just a small power on the periphery of the Forest of Chaos, so it has no attraction to the large powers in the depths of the Forest of Chaos. In other words, the ones coveting the mines are just the small and medium-sized powers on the periphery. Once the dwarves are exposed and let everyone know of the existence of this place, those small and medium-sized powers will be worried. This is because they know in their hearts that even if they occupy this place, it would be nothing more than a hot potato. This place has already been plundered by the spirit insects, so I think most powers won't take the risk. The human's words were not without reason. Chu Tian stopped here and let the dwarves think about it, so he didn't say anything else. Come, let's work. Chu Tian called Vivian and Yingying over to arrange the array. When the dwarves saw the actions of the humans and elves, they all felt it was very strange. First they took out 5-6 strange energy pillars, then they drew a very strange source energy array. Space warehouse, open. They spent 2 hours to arrange the array. Of course the conditions couldn't compare to the laboratory. Vivian needed to personally use her spirit energy to activate the energy pillars and the array. Space twisted. Finally a black hole-like spatial structure was opened. Chu Tian immediately shouted, Dongfeng, Big Sister Bing, put the materials in. Because the space warehouse's space was limited and Chu Tian didn't bring out a lot of energy pillars, they couldn't transport all of the rewards the dwarves gave Chu Tian, but they could at least transport the most important part first. These materials were used to make the source energy cannons and storm rifles. When they saw the humans putting the materials into the space warehouse, the dwarves were all stunned. They had never seen such a strange thing before. As the energy in the energy pillar was quickly consumed, Chu Tian knew that it had reached its limit. It's about time, close it. Alright. Vivian was covered in sweat from maintaining the stability of the source energy array. When she heard Chu Tian's order, she immediately closed the source energy array in relief. Meng Yingying said in a satisfied voice, with the support of these materials, the company will be able to make quite a few cannons. Only, our communication channel isn't open. How will Elder Sister know that the materials have been transported? Don't worry, Vivian said with a giggle. I already completed a detection technique before I left. No matter where this space warehouse is, as long as it's opened, the laboratory will have a reaction. I think Elder Sister Meng Qingwu has already found out and is calling people to unload the goods. That's good. Meng Yingying was completely relieved. We'll send the rest over in a bit. The dwarves finally couldn't hold it in and came over in curiosity. What did you just do? This is called the space warehouse. Vivian proudly explained the use of the space warehouse. Don't be envious, this is Chu Tian's unique invention. It can't be found anywhere else on the continent, it's unique. The dwarves looked at each other. They could see the shock in each other's eyes. If the dwarves could also have a space warehouse, would they still be robbed by strong enemies? Where did these humans come from? How could they have this kind of strange technology? Chu Tian seemed like he was not willing to talk about the space warehouse. What does the chief think of my suggestion? Even if this method works. The chief said with a sigh, but for a small town that has been exposed, where would we find a reliable ally to defend it with? After all, the fellows in this forest all have ulterior motives. That's also true. Chu Tian had been waiting for him to say this for a long time. Actually, our miracle commerce is interested in investing in Oldman's small town. The dwarves still have control over Oldman's small town, and miracle commerce will use this small town as a transfer point and small trading base. Of course, as an ally, miracle commerce will also take on the responsibility of protecting Oldman's small town. What was miracle commerce? The leader of the dwarfs hesitated. What is Uncle Dwarf still hesitating for? Vivian couldn't help saying, the space warehouse is a wonderful technology, our miracle commerce has a lot of it. Cooperating with our miracle commerce, the dwarves will not suffer a loss. The dwarves discussed with each other. They couldn't keep the Oldman mines, so why not take a gamble? Not only were these people strong, their backgrounds were not normal. Moreover, they had already given the matter of taking back the Oldman mines, so most of the dwarves were willing to believe them. All right, we agree. Then, from today onwards, the Oldman mines will be changed to Oldman's small town. Chu Tian's heart was filled with joy. They were really too easy to trick. They had traveled tens of thousands of miles this time, and their most important task had been completed. Miracle Commerce would establish their first stronghold on the edge of the Forest of Chaos. This stronghold had a very important meaning because it meant that Miracle Commerce would use this as a springboard to spread their influence across the entire Forest of Chaos. They had finally taken the first step. Chapter 739. The small town gave people a very strange feeling. Each person was tightly wrapped, and not only were they wearing large hoods, they were also wearing all kinds of strange masks. They seemed to be in a hurry and didn't talk to anyone. This place was specially built to facilitate the exchange of goods between the villages. Most of the people that moved were from the nearby villages, and these villages were on guard against each other. As for the residents of the town, whether it was the great Zhou country's alchemist or the weapon shop owner, they were all criminals that escaped from various places. Each person was a hidden danger. Who was willing to deal with this kind of person? There was another kind of person hiding in the small town. This kind of person was a hunter, a bandit, or a human trafficker. Their job was to find a suitable village and kill them for profit. The women of the rabbit race, fox race, and elves could all be sold for a good price. The dwarves, bear race, and tiger race were all qualified slaves. The Forest of Chaos was rich in resources, and even the smallest village had quite a few treasures. Therefore, killing and stealing was the fastest way to get rich. There were no laws or rules here, so who could resist this kind of temptation? Under this layer of danger, a small town in the Forest of Chaos was completely different from a civilized country. It was very dangerous every time they came here. If it wasn't done well, not only would their lives be in danger, it would even bring disaster to their entire clan. It was because of this that Chu Tian's group was too eye-catching. The 5 of them did not hide themselves at all as they swaggered in. Apart from one elf who couldn't be judged, the other 4 looked very young and didn't seem to be very powerful, so how could they not attract attention? They were simply pieces of fat meat. When the 5 of them arrived in the small town, they immediately felt over 10 gazes filled with ill intent. Dongfeng, go and ask around. Chu Tian ignored the people sharpening their knives in the corner. See if this town has anything we want. Alright. Dongfeng Haoren turned around and left. This Dongfeng Haoren was the previous Southern Summer King's eldest son and had the chance to become the new Southern Summer King, but he had become a member of Miracle Commerce. This was fate playing with people. But Dongfang Haoran did not have any interest in the throne, rather he would have a better growth with miracle commerce. This fellow was like an unpolished jade. With a bit of carving, he would become another calm martial ruler, even surpassing Dongfang Gan. Chu Tian decided to train Dongfang Haoran into a miracle commerce general. He would have to rely on him to lead miracle commerce's army in the future. However, Dongfang Haoran was too young, so bringing him along to gain experience was also a good thing. Let's find a place to rest. There should be a hotel here. The four of them did not even take 2 steps. Several tall and strong figures appeared in front of them, each one holding a weapon in their hands. Chu Tian took a closer look and saw that there were several fierce-looking foreign races. There were rat race thieves, barbarian race men, and their leader was a lizard man covered in green scales. Because they were close, Chu Tian could even smell the strong stench coming from the other side. Chu Tian knit his brows. What advice do you have? The few of them looked at each other with greed in their eyes. Your goods aren't bad. The lizard man in the lead threw out 3 low-grade source stones and pointed behind him as he said, I'll buy these 3 women. Take the money and scram. Chu Tian was a bit stunned. What was this? 3 low-grade source stones? The fiendish lizard man glared at Chu Tian. Are you deaf? I've already given you the money and your women are in my hands. If you don't scram, I'll teach you a lesson. Go ask around and see who dares offend us in this small town. Meng Yingying, Vivian, and Chen Bingyu's faces sunk. Although they knew that the atmosphere in the Forest of Chaos was bad, being so rude and unreasonable in broad daylight really made people angry. Although there were many people watching, most of them were just here to watch the show. Chu Tian narrowed his eyes and said, It seems like you don't understand the situation. Refusing a toast only to drink a forfeit. The lizard man pulled out the blade at his waist and a green spirit energy was released. Then go die. Not weak. An illustrious soul realm strength. In this kind of unknown small town, a random small character actually had the strength of the 4th awakened soul layer. No wonder he dared to be this arrogant. The Forest of Chaos overall strength was much stronger than the small southern summer country. However, he had offended the wrong person. No one saw what happened. The lizard man's blade slashed down on the ice crystal-like sword, but the lizard man's blade broke like tofu. These lizard men were all shocked. This blade was still a high-grade soul weapon, but it broke with a single touch. How was this possible? I want this sword too. The lizard man swept out like an eagle's claw, looking like he wanted to take the sword. Chu Tian turned his wrist and the netherworld sword came out of its sheath. The lizard man did not even know what happened before his arm was cut off. He gave a pitiful cry and retreated while holding his arm, but his arm was covered in blue and white netherworld flames. The flames quickly spread and wherever it went, the muscles quickly withered. In just a few seconds, it had spread to his entire body. The originally strong man had suddenly become as thin as a stick, finally breaking apart and turning into smoking fragments. The other lizard men revealed looks of fear when they saw this. They could not understand. Only the small villages around this town knew about it, so how could a small village like this have such a powerful character? It was too late to run. Chen Bingyu waved her hand and large amounts of crystal-clear snowflakes flew out, instantly piercing into the lizard men's bodies. Several hundred sharp icicles appeared in these lizard men's bodies, turning them into giant ice porcupines. They did not even have the slightest bit of resistance before they were killed. Meng Yingying spat at the corpses on the ground. This kind of guy wants to fight us? This kind of bad person. Even Meng Yingying did not have the slightest bit of pity. The surrounding onlookers revealed looks of dread. Wherever the 4 of them went, everyone moved far away and no one dared to approach them. If they could kill the chicken to warn the monkey and save themselves some trouble, that would be the best. But would the situation be as smooth as Chu Tian imagined? The passers-by whispered to each other with eyes filled with schadenfreude, preparing to watch a good show. Chu Tian knew that this matter would not pass this easily. But even like this, Chu Tian did not need to be afraid. He did not believe that a small town on the edge of the Forest of Chaos would have anything that could threaten him. This is considered a hotel? Meng Yingying was standing in an incomparably simple stone house. It was like several stone balls buried in the ground, with the surface covered in moss and vines. There were even poisonous insects like centipedes and spiders crawling through the cracks. The inside of the small stone house was not much better. Each stone house was completely sealed and did not even have a single window. There were no lamps. The lighting tools here were glowing substances extracted from the sap of fireflies. Each stone house was less than 2 meters tall and less than 10 square meters in area. It was simply like a dog's kennel. Meng Yingying felt that instead of living in this kind of place, it would be better to sleep in a tent in the forest. Safety was the most important thing in the forest of chaos. Although these houses were simple, they were relatively stable. What Meng Yingying, Vivian, and the others could not accept was that the owner of the hotel was an orc. The hotel owner was actually an orc. Orcs were a different race from spirit beasts, and there were many of them in the forest of chaos. Their typical characteristic was their green skin, incomparably tall bodies, and 2 large fangs. They were even more barbaric than the barbarians. The half-beastman boss was wearing an apron-like pants and his upper body was covered in scars. 2 short axes hung on his back, and his long hair was tied into dozens of thin braids that draped over his back. His mouth was full of a rancid stench that could make people faint from a distance of 10 feet. On the wall behind him, there were all kinds of marinated demon beast meat, with some of them having maggots on them. There were also bottles of unknown wine placed in a row. Do you want to stay here? The orc spoke in the spirit beast language, 1 low-grade source stone per day. So expensive. Meng Yingying's eyes popped out. 1 low-grade source stone was equivalent to 1 million gold coins. 4-5 million gold coins could buy a pretty good hotel in the southern summer country. You're definitely trying to rip us off because we're outsiders. The orc dug his large nose. Ignoring Vivian and Meng Yingying's disgust, he took out a sticky substance and smeared it on his pants. So what if I rip you off? You can't stay if you want. Yingying, forget it. Chu Tian didn't want any trouble, so he took out 3 low-grade source stones, at most 3. Arrange a room for us. The orc's eyes lit up and he immediately put away the source stones. He put on a smiling face. All right, come with me. The green-skinned fellow brought them into the room. Meng Yingying looked at the dirty orc and her heart began to whisper. The orcs were the most notorious race, even worse than the barbarians. Was it really a good idea to live in their place? After the orc boss took the money, he became much more enthusiastic. Dongfang Haoren came back at this time. I didn't see any or being sold in the market. There were only some local specialties being traded here. Wouldn't this have been a wasted trip? And they were living in this kind of damn place. It's not strange, small villages have low refining skills. Even if they found a high level ore, they wouldn't be able to mine it. Even if they could mine it, they wouldn't be able to refine it. Chu Tian shook his head and said, but it's not a wasted trip. At least in this town, we can gather more information or find the nearest city in the forest. While they were talking, the orc boss came back with a dirty plate. He very enthusiastically placed it in front of them. They saw a bottle of wine and a few pieces of black beast meat on the plate. The boss wiped his dirty and greasy hands on his equally dirty trousers. His ugly and hideous face grinned, revealing his 2 yellow tusks. Honored guests, please have a taste. This is our Beastman race's wine, free of charge. You will like it. He personally poured a cup and gave it to Chu Tian. Chu Tian looked at the muddy liquid in the cup and his expression became strange. The orc boss was very angry. In the orc race, refusing a friend's wine is very rude. Old brother, it's fine if you put poison in the wine. Chu Tian said with a look of disdain. Can't you change it to a better wine? This is like shit. Who do you expect to drink it? You want to use it to poison us? Do you really think father's brain is full of shit? The orc boss was shocked. He had bought this poison from the town's alchemist. He had promised that it was colorless and tasteless, so no one would be able to see through it. There were many guests that stayed in the inn that had been easily poisoned by the orc boss and taken all their belongings. How could this fellow recognize it with a single glance? You dare not appreciate it. The orc boss directly smashed the cup and pulled out 2 short axes from his back. He fiercely said, "I'll let you know the result of rejecting the orc's good intentions. If the soft approach didn't work, they would use the hard approach?" Dongfang Haoren kicked out and the orc boss was sent flying out the door. The strong? The orc boss quickly stood up, but before he could say anything, an arrow pierced through the stone wall and pierced through the orc boss' chest. Damn. Where did this arrow come from? The Beastman boss had died without knowing why. More and more arrows pierced through the walls, wildly shooting at the people in the inn. It was clear that the person outside wanted to kill everyone in the inn. Chu Tian's group felt this was strange. Who the fuck was shooting arrows outside? Could this place be any more chaotic? I'll do it. Chapter 740. Southern Summer Country, Southern State City, Miracle Commerce. The 3,000 barbarian berserkers were standing in neat rows. The Divine Wind Marquis and the Golden Arrow Marquis, the 2 Southern Summer Marquis, were standing on the left and right. There was also a beautiful fiery red-haired beauty standing on a high platform. Do you want to get rich? Do you want to become stronger? Do you want to have more wealth and power? Nangong Yun held a megaphone and shouted at the top of her lungs to interact with a large group of barbarian soldiers. The barbarian soldiers' responses were deafening and resounded through the heavens. Their 2-meter-tall bodies were clad in sturdy armor, and they held heavy weapons forged from dark steel in their hands. This was not a small price that Miracle Commerce had spent to train. This was the first Berserker heavy infantry unit. Miracle Commerce did not have any talented generals, so they invited the Golden Arrow Marquis and the Divine Wind Marquis to help train them. The 2 of them were veterans of the battlefield, and the Golden Arrow Marquis was famous for his training. Although half a month was not long for this kind of special unit, they did not need to train their martial skills, their stamina, or their tactics. They just needed to instill in them the basic qualities of an obedient soldier. The 3,000 barbarians had been brainwashed and trained. Now they all considered themselves members of Miracle Commerce. The barbarians were a barbarian race with a low status. How could they ever have a chance to stand out? Each berserker was the pride of their tribe and family. It was because they brought glory and generous treatment to their tribe and family that these barbarians recognized their status for the first time. Now they all wanted to go onto the battlefield and kill their enemies, earning more benefits and glory for themselves, their family, and their tribe. How strong were the 3,000 trained barbarian soldiers? The Golden Arrow Marquis and the Divine Wind Marquis could not accurately describe it. Even if they were not equipped with Miracle Commerce's advanced weapons, once these berserkers entered a berserk state, they could fight against the strongest army of the Southern Summer Country, the Earth Dragon Army. What kind of terrifying battle strength was this? If they were equipped with the advanced source energy weapons, the strength of this army would be unimaginable. The 2 marquises had been on the battlefield for many years, and even in the Warring Kingdom, this kind of army would be the elite of the elite. This was something that could only be created with large amounts of resources and time. Miracle Commerce had only used a month to make one. Now in the barbarian camp, there were over 10,000 barbarian soldiers preparing to become berserkers. If the Southern Summer Country had this kind of army, they wouldn't need to worry about the warhounds invading their territory. Nangong Yun was very satisfied with the results of the Berserker Army's training. Although these barbarians did not have the quality of elite soldiers, at least they could be trained properly. Just having this was enough. Once the Berserkers entered a berserk state, their battle strength would increase by several times. Moreover, they would not feel any pain or fear. This was an army that would never collapse in morale. The materials sent back from the space warehouse had already been estimated by Miracle Commerce to be enough to make 100 source energy cannons, 500 source energy cannons, or 1,000 storm rifles. The high-level metal materials brought back from the royal treasury were only enough to make 4 source energy cannons. The remaining materials were used to make a single storm rifle. Chu Tian had not been in the Forest of Chaos for long, but he had already obtained several times the amount of materials. If they were all made into weapons, Miracle Commerce would have a qualitative leap. Nangong Yun was very excited that the time was right. Her strength had been growing quite fast, and she was now in the 8th awakened soul layer, but she was very unhappy being stuck in Southern State. She had long wanted to show off her skills in the Forest of Chaos. The fact that the boss could send back this many materials meant that he was doing quite well. This was a must. How could a group of locals in the Forest of Chaos stop him? She really didn't know when everyone would be able to move into the forest. Young Miss Nangong. A Griffin Knight came to report, Sir Cloud Dream Marquis has an important matter, please see her at the airship factory. Airship factory? Why would she go there? Nangong Yun did not ask anything else and immediately came to the large factory. This was where Southern State made the airships. The airships had a unique advantage and convenience, so the company placed a lot of importance on them, so they kept producing them. With the improvement of technology, the current airships, whether it was weight, speed, or lifespan, they could not be compared to Chu Tian's original airship. When Nangong Yun arrived, she saw Feng Kaidai, Yun Yao, and the others here. Everyone had a confused look on their faces, not knowing why Meng Qingwu called them over. I want to show you something. Meng Qingwu kept them in suspense as she revealed a mysterious smile. Come with me first. Meng Qingwu brought them into a factory with a very high level of security. 3 very strange airships immediately appeared in front of them. They were twice the size of a normal airship and their structure was very tight. The oval-shaped airbags were made from high-level demon beast skin and there were complex source energy arrays on the surface. It could increase their speed and float, as well as resist frost, fire, and even lightning. The cabins were not just simply hanging, rather they were seamlessly connected to the airbags. The cabins were made from a thin layer of hard and light crystal, which was divided into several sealed rooms. Even if they were floating 10,000 meters in the air, they would not feel the slightest bit of cold or wind. The airships were used for short and medium distance transportation, so they pursued a higher weight and space. The airships in front of them had exquisite suspension cabins, but the space was smaller, so they did not look like transportation tools at all. Feng Katie's beautiful eyes flashed. Such exquisite airships. Did elder sister specially make them? It's not as simple as just exquisite. Meng Qingwu made a gesture and several workers on the side opened the cabin door. Come, let's take a look. Several women walked into the cabin. It was very simple and clean inside. There were 2 living rooms, a storage room, and a bathroom. It was like a place where one could fly in the sky. Did Meng Qingwu want to make a flying cabin? This did not match Meng Qingwu's personality. Everyone knew that this chairman was a practical person and would never chase after fancy and impractical things. Yun Yao opened a room. Isn't this a beast pen? This was a place similar to a corridor. There was a beast pen several meters wide and there was a feeding space. There was a row of cabin doors that could be opened in front of them. This should be the Griffin's living room. Normally the Griffin would be raised here and when it was time to use it, they could ride the Griffin to open the door on the other side and immediately leave the airship. These interior designs took up most of the space in the cabin, but no one could see what special use this airship had. Meng Qingwu did not keep them in suspense at this time. She opened the door to a closed room in the center and the girls were stunned when they saw what was inside. There was nothing inside, but there were 3 pagodas. One was a magnetic sound tower, one was a magnetic image tower, and one was a super wave transmission tower. Even if they were stupid, they would be enlightened when they saw this and they would be filled with admiration for Meng Qingwu. You should understand now. Meng Qingwu revealed a faint smile. She was always elegant and beautiful, not showing off at all. It was like she was introducing a very normal tool. The airship structure is simple, it is easy to produce, and the cost is low. It is very practical and is not limited to transportation. I have been preparing to build this kind of industrial control ship in Central State. For this reason, I have flipped through books on mechanical techniques and power structures, as well as studying the composition of the atmosphere and etc. There is a still flow area 30,000 meters above the continent. There are very few changes in the air and it is not a place where demon beasts are active. I can use the airship to create a mobile communication station in the sky. It had to be said. Meng Qingwu's idea was too quick. Miracle Commerce's information transmission system was limited. Even in the southern summer country, there were only a few communication stations in the main cities. Around 80% of the area was not covered because it was very troublesome to build a communication station. If it was this troublesome to use the mirror in the southern summer country, it was even more impossible in the Forest of Chaos. But if they used this special airship, the situation would be different. Not only would it save a lot of effort, it would allow Miracle Commerce's signal to be spread over a wider area. It would also have a high mobility and it would be easier to protect. It would also allow them to create an air attack force. Tens of thousands of meters in the air, they could calculate the flow of the atmosphere and the enemy's position. They could drop large amounts of high-altitude bombs and that terrifying attack would rain down on the enemy's area. Elder sister is truly too smart. Nan Gongyun gave a heartfelt praise. Can we use these 3 airships now? Of course we can. Meng Qingwu said in a confident voice. I have prepared 3 airships to park 30-40,000 meters outside the Forest of Chaos, allowing the signal to cover Chu Tian's area. This way, communication will be much easier. Each airship can have 15 Griffin Knights, so I'll leave this task to little sister Kai Dai and little sister Yun Yao. Alright. The 2 girls immediately agreed. The more airships they had, the better. It would be best if they could make several hundred of them, covering wherever they wanted to, letting Miracle Commerce's influence spread to every corner of the Forest of Chaos. What about me? I can't forget you. Meng Qingwu said to Nan Gongyun. I've obtained Chu Tian's message from the space warehouse. He has already gained a foothold in the forest, but he seems to have caused a bit of trouble. He needs the Berserker army to send reinforcements, so you can lead our army to meet up with Chu Tian. The Berserker army's source energy weapons can't keep up, but I will urge the company to make them. It should be about time for you to meet up and I will send people through the space warehouse. Meng Qingwu was like a strategist that planned everything. Boss is in trouble? How could this be? I'll go right now. Nan Gongyun was filled with fighting spirit. I just wanted to test the might of the Berserker army. There shouldn't be anything that can threaten the Berserker army on the edge of the forest, but we can't be too careless. This army is too important to us. Meng Qingwu had to remind Nan Gongyun, after all, this fellow was a bit brash. We have to be low-key. Now is not the time to attract the attention of the large powers. Also bring a few more communication devices. The airships will be faster than you, so wherever you go will be covered with signals. You have to keep in contact with me and Chu Tian. Understood. On the second day, they set off. The 3 special airships slowly rose into the air, smoothly reaching several tens of thousands of meters in the air. The air here was thin, but it was very stable. All the weather changes happened below and the surroundings were empty. Even if they entered the forest, they wouldn't see any demon beasts. The 3 large airships slowly headed into the Forest of Chaos like this, preparing to establish a communication channel between Miracle Commerce and Oldman Small Town. In a few days, Oldman Small Town would be able to use products like radios. Nan Gongyun led the 3,000 trained Berserker heavy infantry into the forest from southern state, beginning a long journey. Chapter 741. Dozens of fierce bandits from different races surrounded the small inn in circles. Every single one of them held a bow in their hands and shot arrows at the inn. They were clearly not ordinary people. Every arrow contained powerful spirit energy, and that sharp power could easily pierce through a small stone house. That half-beastman boss was killed by the arrows. This is the result of offending us. The leader of the Snake clan summoned several large fireballs and smashed them. This small inn that was riddled with holes finally exploded and collapsed. The raging flames burned the inn to ashes, and under the heat, the corpses were burnt to ashes. Stop! The snake race leader waved his hand. They should be dead. Dig out the corpses and hang them up. Let everyone have a look. I want to see who dares to kill my Siku subordinates. A few bandits rushed to the ruins and extinguished the fire. They immediately began to search for the corpses. Boss, there's no one here? What did you say? The snake man Sika had a lifeless face. This was impossible. They were clearly inside. Could it be that they had evaporated? At this moment, a voice came from behind him. Hi, are you looking for us? Siku turned around and 5 people appeared behind him. They were less than 10 meters away and it seemed like they had been standing here for a long time. However, Siku did not sense them at all. For humans and one elf. Weren't they the people who had offended him? But now, he was completely unscathed and had mysteriously appeared behind him. Meng Yingying saw their appearance and said in a disgusted voice, "What kind of race is this? Why are they all so ugly?" The snake race was not a spirit beast, rather it was an independent race. They had a snake's lower body and a human's upper body, but their skin was covered in scales. Their eyes were cold and gloomy, their voices were low and hoarse, and their tongues were forked, so they looked very ugly. These fellows should be with the lizard men from before. This motley crew did not have any races. It was clear that they were a group of bandits that dominated this place. Damn, you dare play tricks on me. Chu Tian had a face of ridicule. Play tricks on you? Are you worthy? Siku's forked tongue contracted and his snake eyes were filled with anger. Do you know who I am? Fuck, what does it matter to me who you are? Chu Tian impatiently waved his hand. Truly noisy, who can make him shut up? Chen Bingyu and Dongfang Haoren both stepped forward. Siku pulled out a trident. You dare challenge Sir Siku with just you? Overestimating yourselves, die. Siku's 3-meter-long tail jumped up and he shot out from the ground, charging forward like a meteor. A dark green snake source spirit appeared and the surroundings were filled with a green poison mist. A poison-attributed source spirit? This attribute was indeed a bit hard to deal with. But this snake was only in the 7th awakened soul layer. Although he had reached the true soul realm and was placed in the 3 great clans, he could be considered a senior elder. He could be considered a first-class expert in the southern summer country, but meeting Chu Tian's group, he could only be considered unlucky. In the end, Chen Bingyu directly grabbed the trident. Siku revealed a sinister cold smile, seeking death. The trident released a large amount of dark green poison that instantly exploded onto Chen Bingyu's divine sense. This poison was very corrosive and could easily corrode a true soul realm cultivator's protective spirit energy. This girl dared to block this attack with her bare hands. She was no different from a dead person. Who would have thought that Chen Bingyu would not react at all? This strong corrosive poison could not corrode the Starlight immortal body and it could not harm Chen Bingyu at all. Instead, Chen Bingyu released a cold energy from her body and all the poison was frozen. The cold ice spread from the trident to the snake man's body. The snake man saw that the situation was bad and immediately retreated. A pitiful cry rang out. Siku retreated, but with a loud crack, both of his arms broke. His arms were frozen like popsicles, and they fell to the ground together with the trident. This fellow's hands were completely crippled. Everyone was shocked. Siku was not weak, but he was easily defeated. This human girl did not even use her full strength. This meant that this human strength far surpassed everyone's imagination. If you dare kill me, you will regret it. Siku retreated in fear. Dongfang Haoren's source spirit turned into a giant flaming sword. Stepping off the ground, he soared into the sky and instantly appeared in front of Siku. Wait a minute. I am the great spider Count Cannon's subordinate. Before he could even finish, Dongfang Haoren passed by his body. That terrifying sword glow did not cut his body in half, rather it cut a large piece of flesh and blood, leaving a deep mark on the ground. Boss is dead. Everyone quickly run. These wild people usually bullied the people of the small village. When had they ever met such a powerful character? They were instantly scared witless. Chen Bingyu and Dongfang Haoren charged forward. There was a series of pitiful cries and begging for mercy, but in just a short few seconds, everything returned to normal. If they weren't ice shards, they had already been chopped into meat paste. In short, there was not a single person left standing. Siku is dead. Siku is dead. These bandits were clearly the tyrants of this small town. When the snake man and his subordinates were killed, The other people in the small town all revealed looks of shock. Everyone calm down, everyone calm down. Chu Tian felt good about himself and immediately raised his hands and said, everyone doesn't need to thank me or worship me. Eliminating evil for the people, punishing evil for the good, this is what I should do. Vivian said in a doubtful voice, Big Brother Chu Tian, they don't seem to be thanking us. How could that be? Chu Tian was a bit stunned. When his eyes swept over everyone, not only did they not shed tears of gratitude, they all revealed looks of fear. Sika has been killed. The small town is finished, this small town is finished. Damn, where did these people come from? We built this small town with great difficulty and it was destroyed by them. Let's hurry and leave. Cannon's anger is not something we can handle. These people did not have any joy, rather they felt like a disaster was about to befall them. They looked at Chu Tian's group with eyes that did not have the slightest bit of gratitude, rather they were filled with anger and hatred. If they were not strong, they would have already tied them up and offered them to Cannon to beg for forgiveness. What is going on here? Meng Yingying scratched her head. Could it be that killing a few bad people is something we did wrong? What kind of logic is this? When he saw the gazes filled with anger, fear, and blame, he was stunned. Meng Yingying felt like her three views had been turned upside down. When did killing bad people become doing bad things? Chu Tian knit his brows. These fellows did not have a normal background. The powers in the Forest of Chaos were all vassals, so these fellows were controlled by a certain power. That's why they could act so tyrannically in this small town and why the small town was not destroyed. It was all because of this power's protection. This can't be blamed on them. Chu Tian patted Meng Yingying's shoulder. It is not easy for these low-level powers to have a small town. Many villages rely on the small town to survive. Now that the small town cannot be protected, of course they hate us. Then what do? We didn't do anything wrong. Chu Tian shrugged his shoulders. Are we supposed to swallow this humiliation after being bullied? That's not my style. Don't think about it too much. There are many things in this world that can't be said right or wrong. Let's first go to these fellows' nest and see if there are any clues. It would be best if we can investigate the origins of that reptile count. I don't want to cause trouble for no reason. Who is the spider count Cannon? Vivian had never heard of him before, so he shouldn't be any large character. Sika's group was a group of human traffickers in the Forest of Chaos, but they met the spider count and were recruited as his underlings. They were the spider count's agents in the small town, collecting protection fees and transaction fees. Of course, most of this money had to be handed over. In a place like the Forest of Chaos, it was impossible to survive without a strong enough umbrella. The spider count Cannon's reputation was not small. It was his reputation that protected the small town from outsiders. As Sika's agent, naturally no one dared to provoke him, so he could do whatever he wanted in the small town. Not only did he ruthlessly oppress the low-level villagers, he also promoted the business of other human traffickers. This poor ghost doesn't have any property. Chu Tian searched Sika's place. There was a dungeon that had over 100 people locked up and they were all Sika's goods. Chu Tian only found 200 low-grade source stones. This wasn't a small amount to normal people, but it couldn't enter Chu Tian's eyes. Open the dungeon and let everyone go. Chu Tian was not interested in human trafficking, so he opened the dungeon and let everyone go. However, at this time, there was a very special slave that caught Chu Tian's attention. This was a man that was only 3 meters tall, not even as tall as Vivian. However, his muscles were very well developed and his face was covered in a red beard, but his age was around 20-30. Dwarves? Why were there dwarves? The dwarves were famous for their artifact forging techniques. Each dwarf had an outstanding talent in refining, so the price of dwarven slaves was not low. The most important thing was that dwarves usually lived in mines. As long as he found a dwarf, wouldn't he be able to find the high level ores Chu Tian needed? Chu Tian quickly made him stay. Dongfang Haoren walked over with the dwarf in one hand and threw him in front of Chu Tian. The dwarf said a bunch of things and his two little eyes were wide open, as if he was filled with rage. Meng Yingying did not understand the dwarf language, What is he saying? Vivian explained. The dwarves think we are bad people. They think we are human traffickers. Chu Tian explained it in the dwarf language before asking about the ores. After all, buying ores was the most important thing in this trip to the Forest of Chaos. It was impossible for the dwarves not to know about ores. They relied on this to make a living. The dwarf looked at Chu Tian in doubt and asked in a heavily accented human language, "You really aren't Canon's minions? So you can speak the human language?" Meng Yingying rolled her eyes. "We don't even know who Canon is. You just need to tell us if you have ores to buy. We really need them." The dwarf revealed a dejected expression. The dwarves have a lot of ores in their mines, only what? The dwarf's face was full of grief and indignation. "Our mine has been taken away." Taken away? Who did it? Spider Count Cannon. All right. Chu Tian patted his forehead. This time he couldn't avoid it. Chapter 742. There was no doubt that Oldman's small town would be stirred up. This mine that the dwarves had operated for 100 years would actually be turned into a small underground city. It would have a complete water circulation system, indoor plantations, strong defenses, and comfortable houses. It would be the edge of the Forest of Chaos and one of the safest places to live. The dwarves publicly announced that Oldman's small town would be the edge of the Forest of Chaos, the safest and most prosperous market. The dwarves even welcomed the various clans to live here, making Oldman's small town their common home. All the powers that protected the small town would share the taxes and wealth of the small town according to their contributions. This incomparably novel management model was spread in the nearby temporary towns through the posting of notices everywhere. Within a few days, it had spread to the surrounding hundreds of kilometers. Everyone was dumbfounded by this method. Common management? Shared benefits? Long-term development? When did the dwarves become this naive? Could it be the dwarves didn't know that the forest was a group of people who ate alone? They never pursued a long-term business, and only dared to make a one-time deal. While everyone abided by the cruel law of the dark forest, wishing that they could hide in the dark forever and not be discovered by hunters, the dwarves were like a group of people standing around a bonfire, shouting to everyone around them, "Come here, I'm here." This kind of bold method would definitely bring disaster. The Forest of Chaos did not lack hunters, and there was no lack of bandits that lived by plundering, so revealing their position was no different from seeking death. As for this ridiculous suggestion, no one cared about it. But the surrounding villages were stirred up. After Sardo's small town collapsed, there were several villages that did not have a suitable place to trade. When they heard this news, they couldn't help coming over to take a look. When the several villages arrived at the underground Oldman small town, they were stunned by the scene in front of them. There was a giant screen hanging at the entrance, and the mirror-like screen was actually playing the situation of Oldman small town. It introduced the location and characteristics of the small town's market, as well as the benefits of doing business in Oldman small town, as well as strategies for merchants coming to the small town to do business. This kind of new advertising method made everyone's eyes light up. But everyone quickly found that they were surprised too early, because when they entered Oldman small town, an even more shocking scene appeared in front of them. Without a doubt, this was an underground city. There were many underground cities in the Forest of Chaos. The underground cities were hidden, sealed, dark, and airtight. However, Oldman's small town completely subverted people's notions. Not only was the air circulation very smooth, the most important thing was that the small town was brightly lit. There were giant electric lamps hanging high up, and the light was enough to light up the entire small town. The underground palace made by the dwarves had a grand atmosphere, and the light made it look very dignified. There were speakers on both sides to guide the guests. This is too mysterious. The rabbit village chief looked at the light with a face filled with amazement. What kind of light is this? It's not like a crystal lamp. So why is it this bright? When people entered the Oldman small town's market, they found that it was deserted and there were almost no people here, but the dwarves had already listed out some goods. Of course it came from miracle commerce. Other than high-quality pills and talismans, there were also some simple things. For example, canned food, wine, electric lamps, cameras, and some other necessities that were scarce in the forest. Chu Tian gave all the goods to the dwarves to sell, generously splitting the profits 50-50 with the dwarves. The ingredients of these things were not high level, but they were very fresh, immediately attracting the attention of the villagers. Some people bought some of these things back. As long as someone tried it, then it would be much easier. Oldman small town's special goods were spread through the other black markets, small towns, and underground markets. In just a few days, there were more and more people coming to Oldman small town. It was the same as before, most of them were people from small villages. The Oldman mine market did not just sell goods, it also bought various resources, demon beast meat, herbs, ores, and leather. As long as they were common materials, they would buy them at a very fair price. Everyone became even crazier. The villages could more or less take out some of these things. If they were taken to other markets, they wouldn't even be sold for half the price in Oldman small town. With a simple comparison, even a fool would make the right choice. The enticement of the Oldman small town's official market attracted a lot of people. In around a week, there were over 100 small villages and small tribes that came to the small town, becoming more and more popular. There were even people from far away who were prepared to make the long journey here to trade. From the moment Oldman small town was opened until now, there were no hunters or bandits that came to rob them. People analyzed the reason and finally came to a reasonable conclusion. First, there were 5,000 brave dwarves in the Oldman mines. Normal small-scale hunters and bandits did not dare take the risk. Second, the Oldman mines had already been robbed once and the most valuable weapons and equipment had been taken away. Third, the Oldman mines had already been exposed and everyone knew about this place. What meaning was there in attacking it? Instead, it was possible that a large power would come looking for them. Fourth, the Oldman mines had begun to openly recruit allies. The goods that came from the market clearly did not come from the hands of the dwarves. This meant that there were other powers involved in the Oldman mines and they did not dare enter without investigating it clearly. Like this, Oldman small town danced on the tip of a knife, not attracting any unexpected disasters. Rather, this small town became famous. There was no large power protecting it, but no one dared to move against it. It was unknown when this delicate balance would break, but before this balance was broken, it was safe. There were large benefits here and no one would go against benefits. Now it was not just small villages that came to Oldman small town to trade, there were some small and medium-sized powers that couldn't sit still and sent people to participate. The small town was filled with a thriving scene. The dwarves were very happy about this because after the small town opened its market, not only would they receive a high percentage of Miracle Commerce's goods, they would also receive a bit of profit from other transactions. If this continued, the dwarves would quickly become rich. The dwarf chief came to find Chu Tian with a worried expression. Although the market is lively, no one is willing to become our ally and defend Oldman with us. If this continues and the small town becomes more prosperous, it will eventually attract a disaster. When strength and wealth were not equal, it was the time of crisis. Once Oldman small town became prosperous, the accumulated wealth of the small town would increase and there would be more and more resources. When it reached a certain level, it would attract people's greed. Don't be anxious, this is very normal. Chu Tian was very confident in the development of the situation. Oldman small town has just been established and this kind of joint management is a new concept in the forest. When something new appears, people will need more time to observe it. Moreover, because the small town is open, we will be in the eye of the storm. It is normal for other people to question our strength, so what we need now is a chance to display our strength. The Oldman small town's management model was indeed very advanced in the Forest of Chaos. With many powers managing it, the small town's profits would be shared. Whoever gave the small town more protection would be able to obtain more taxes and benefits. He believed that some medium-sized and large-sized powers would be interested in this and send a part of their forces to the small town, forming a joint security force. Like this, the marauders would not dare act rashly. The dwarves were not afraid of losing control of the mines. After all, they were only sharing the market. The dwarves could still mine on the third floor and live as usual. At this time, the surrounding space began to fluctuate. Chutan, there's a situation. What is going on? We've found a bit of information. Vivian anxiously said to Chu Tian, there is a large group of spirit insects moving in the west and they seem to be coming our way. I suspect they are Cannon's companions. How many? I'm not too clear, but there should be at least several tens of thousands. They're finally here? From the moment Oldman's small town was opened, the small town would inevitably be challenged. Chu Tian was already mentally prepared. As long as he became famous in the forest, there would be an endless stream of people coming to join him. The spirit insects are good at digging holes. We have to be on guard. Chu Tian first wrote a letter and placed it in the space warehouse to ask the young miss for help. After half a day, he opened the space warehouse again, but the letter had already been taken away and there were over 1,000 landmines in its place. Chu Tian understood the young miss' meaning and immediately called Vivian over to have her bury the landmines. These landmines were buried around 10 kilometers away from the small town and around 10 meters underground. There were large amounts of tree roots on top, so it was not easy to trigger them on the surface. If something came from underground, it would be blown to pieces. In just 2 days, the news of the spirit insects' army attacking Oldman's small town spread like wildfire. The small town that had become lively with great difficulty instantly became deserted. Each village tried their best to hide, avoiding being caught up in the battle. At the same time, they paid close attention to the battle. Whether Oldman's small town was strong or weak, it would be decided in this battle. It wasn't just the small powers paying attention, even the large powers on the edge of the forest were paying close attention. When the battle was about to erupt, Chu Tian received the large amounts of source energy weapons from the space warehouse. The forest had already been covered by Miracle Commerce's signal. Chu Tian contacted Nangong Yun through the communication device and the 3,000 berserkers had already arrived at the Oldman mines. Chu Tian's heart instantly calmed down. With the source energy weapons, the berserkers and the dwarves' help, what was there to worry about? Chapter 743. The dwarves were naturally on guard against humans. This was the same reason as the elves being on guard against humans. Humans were one of the most complicated races on the continent. Saying they were noble, of course it wasn't right, but saying they were evil, it wasn't completely right either. However, the human traffickers and hunters in the Forest of Chaos were mostly working for the humans. The humans were gradually becoming the richest and most technologically advanced group on the continent. Although the human race's overall strength was weaker than the spirit beasts and elves, their future potential could already be seen. The dwarves already had nothing. Being on guard was being on guard, but there was nothing to lie about, so he said everything he could. This dwarf's full name was Tino Oldman and he lived in the Oldman mines 200 kilometers away. The Oldman mines had around 50,000 dwarves at its peak and after 100 years of development, they had built a large underground palace. The dwarves were a bit similar to the dragons, having a strong hoarding and liking to collect precious things. But compared to the dragons who were greedy, the dwarves only liked mineral deposits, like precious metals, rare crystal ores, or divine weapons. Therefore, an old mine that had been operating for 100 years was no different from a treasure. This was also the source of all disasters. The dwarves followed the dark forest law, trying their best to hide themselves. However, they were different from the other races in that once the other races were exposed, they would immediately move away, but the dwarves could not give up on their mines. The Oldman mines were finally exposed, attracting countless greedy people. But the dwarves were a race of warriors. They had strong weapons and were very powerful in battle. Adding in the defense system they had built over 100 years, it was very hard for enemies to break in. In the last 10 years, they had been attacked every now and then, but the dwarves had won every time. Only the long-term battles had consumed the dwarves' population and they had shrunk to around half of their peak population. While the dwarves were feeling tired, a powerful opponent had appeared. This guy was Cannon, nicknamed the Spider Count. Cannon had hired large amounts of bandits to attack from the outside and he had the spider army dig tunnels to launch a sneak attack from the inside. After a fierce battle, The dwarves were either dead or captured alive. The entire Oldman mines had fallen, and even those that managed to escape were powerless to reverse the situation. The dwarves' 100 years of wealth had been taken by cannon, and over 1,000 dwarves had been sold as slaves to human countries. The entire Oldman dwarf clan was finished. Tino drank cup after cup of wine with a face filled with resentment. Vivian was filled with righteous indignation. He is just a nobody this princess has never heard of, yet he can be this arrogant. Brother dwarves, don't worry, we will help you take back the mines. Meng Yingying scratched her head, a bit not understanding. I know about spirit beasts and elves, but what are these spirit insects? From the spider count, nickname, and the dwarf's description, this fellow was without a doubt a spirit insect. The Forest of Chaos did not just have a few strong powers on the surface, there were many other powers that were hidden and unknown. The spirit insect power was like this. As for how strong they were, the elves all had their own theories, and there was no conclusion for a long time. The spirit insects were very special, living in the underground world. Most of the underground cities were ruled by various spirit insects, so in terms of influence, the spirit insects were not inferior to the elves or spirit beasts. But because the spirit insects did not like living on the surface, they rarely clashed with the elves or spirit beasts, so it was hard to estimate the other side's strength. There were some elven elders who expressed their opinions that the spirit insects hidden in the Forest of Chaos underground world were much stronger than imagined. They were one of the most mysterious powers in the Forest of Chaos, so the elves had to take precautions. But there were elven elders who thought that the spirit insects were similar to the spirit beasts. There were many different races. There were many different spirit insect races that would fight with each other, and the intensity would not be inferior to the battles on the surface. Although there were many of them, there was nothing to worry about. No matter who was right, the large amount of spirit insects in the Forest of Chaos was an indisputable fact. From Tino's description, the spider count cannon was very strong. Not to mention that Cannon had at least 20-30,000 people in his hands, and they were all not weak troops. No matter how strong Chu Tian's group was, if they met a battle where the numbers were not equal, they would be exhausted to death. Once their spirit energy was exhausted, it was useless no matter how high their cultivation base was. We don't have enough people, how many dwarven soldiers are left? Although the dwarves were not smart, they still had to be careful when it came to the whereabouts of their companions. Who knew if this fellow in front of them was Cannon's plan to eliminate the remaining dwarves? If we don't even have basic trust, how can we help you? Humans, how can I trust you? Tino coldly said, would you be so kind as to help the dwarves fight? Dwarves looked. Vivian stood up and released her powerful spirit energy. A dagger filled with spatial energy appeared. If you still think I'm Cannon's subordinate, then I have nothing to say. Spirit energy strength. True spirit realm. It was a spatial attributed source spirit. True spirit realm experts were very rare, not to mention a true spirit realm expert with an innate spatial attribute. Even if Cannon had skills as high as the sky, he could not find this kind of person to work for him. Not to mention that Vivian was an elf and the elves were a trustworthy race. The dwarves have 5,000 soldiers retreat to the new mines and prepare for battle. Tino no longer hesitated as he immediately stood up and said, as long as you help the dwarves take back the Oldman mine, no matter what you want, the dwarves will agree. 5,000 people? This number was a bit small, but it was enough. This place was far from the southern summer country, so it was not convenient for Chu Tian to bring the army over, so he could only make do with it. The dwarf race was brave and good at fighting. 5,000 of them was not a weak force. The dwarves' gathering place was a new mine that had been developed for less than 2 years. From the surface, it looked like a cave, but there were several long tracks inside. There were large black iron carts on the tracks, and the smelting room had just been built, so it looked very simple. The 5,000 dwarves were hiding here, planning to take back the Oldman mine that belonged to the dwarves. Although they knew that fighting with the strength of 5,000 people was no different from sending themselves to death, the dwarves were a stubborn race, so they would give it a try no matter what. Tino brought back reinforcements at this time, and the other dwarves were very surprised. An old dwarf chief was questioning their strength. After all, whether it was the humans or the elves, they were all very young. Chu Tian felt that if he wanted to negotiate with these fellows, he had to show his strength first. Ying, come out. Chu Tian directly said to the dwarf chief, this is the one with the lowest cultivation. If the old chief can harm a single hair on her head, we will help the dwarves for free. Arrogant humans. The old chief disdainfully said, I am in the 8th awakened soul layer and the dwarves have a strong cultivation technique. Even if it was a 9th awakened soul layer cultivator, they wouldn't dare say they wouldn't be injured. Why are you this confident? This is only a bet. Chu Tian softly said, if you can't harm her after we defeat Cannon, I want half of the wealth in the dwarves' mines. Every dwarf was fuming with rage and anger. This fellow was too greedy. He actually opened his mouth and asked for half. The Oldman Mines reserves were the dwarves' 100 years of collection. Cannon had only occupied the Oldman Mine for half a year and most of the things had not been transported yet. This half was a shocking number. This fellow was simply asking for too much. This is very fair. Chu Tian did not think his price was high at all. Without the help of the 5 of us, not to mention half of your 5,000 people, you would only be sending yourselves to your deaths. The dwarves were famous for their stubborn tempers. How could they tolerate this kind of arrogance? A dwarf shouted, you want to take half with just the 5 of you, don't you think you're too greedy? It's not quantity, it's quality. The benefits and risks are equal. Chu Tian did not back down at all. No one knows if Cannon has a stronger power behind him, so helping the dwarves this time is also a risk for us. Alright, I'll bet with you. The dwarf pulled out a battle hammer. This hammer was completely black and flowing with the glow of lava, releasing a strong aura. It was clearly a soul-contracting weapon. I want to see if you can block my hammer. The might of a soul-contracting weapon was shocking. The old dwarf chief had a deep cultivation base at the 8th awakened soul layer. The most important thing was that the dwarf's cultivation technique was wild, overbearing, and powerful. Even if a 9th awakened soul layer cultivator was hit by this hammer, if they didn't die, they would still be heavily injured. Meng Yingying gave a snort and her body was covered in starlight. Come at me. If I dodge, it'll be your win. The old patriarch let out a low roar, and the floor under his feet cracked from the oppressive force. The huge hammer erupted with intense flames, and the air in the entire mine was boiling hot. When the hammer was swung up, the surrounding space crackled, as if a fire dragon was dancing in his hand. Meng Yingying's brows jumped up. The dwarf's strength was truly overbearing. She immediately put away her contempt and released her source spirit, which was a beautiful mirror. A glow came from the mirror and covered Meng Yingying's body. Yingying's mirror source spirit had 2 abilities. The first ability was mirror imitation. As long as she was strong enough, Yingying could copy any cultivation technique or source spirit. Although it was only temporary, it allowed her to have all kinds of abilities. The second ability was mirror reflection, which was a defensive ability. When Yingying was attacked, this source spirit's power would reflect a part of the attack back. When the Starlight Immortal Body and Mirror Source Spirit were used at the same time, Yingying's defensive power increased by several times. The dwarf chief's wild hammer slammed down on Yingying's body. With a giant explosion sound, the surrounding ground was shattered by the force. Meng Yingying only used her arms to block it and she wasn't injured at all. What? The dwarf chief was shocked. An earth-shattering strength was reflected back at him like a mountain. The dwarf chief spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying into the wall, creating a large hole in it. The other dwarves were all shocked. Meng Yingying had a proud look on her face. Although the starlight protecting her body was showing signs of cracking, it had not been broken. This old fellow was truly strong. Meng Yingying used all her strength to activate the mirror source spirit and used up half of her spirit energy to send him flying. The dwarves no longer looked down on these 5 people. If the weakest person had this kind of strength, then how strong was the strongest? Chapter 744. The Spider Marquis Elvis was filled with rage. This was because his younger brother, the spider Count Cannon, had been killed by a group of lowly dwarves. They were all descendants of the spider queen Alexis. Alexis was one of the oldest spirit insects in the Forest of Chaos, and her descendants were spread throughout the Forest of Chaos. Although they had their own influences, Cannon was Elvis's younger brother from the same father, so they had a close relationship. These damn dwarves actually dared to kill his younger brother. This was simply a provocation to Queen Alexis. Exterminate them. Suck their blood dry. Kill all of them. Elvis found the last two brothers with the title of Count and gathered the spider people on the edge of the forest. There was a total of 60,000 people, 10 times the number of dwarves. With these three powerful spider nobles leading the way, the trivial several thousand dwarves were just small fish and meat waiting to be sacrificed on the altar. The spider army charged into the valley where Oldman's small town was. The dwarves' mines are in front of us. Should we directly attack them? They were only 20-30 kilometers from Oldman's small town. With the spider army's speed, they could charge in and attack in one breath. The dwarves' mines are very strong. Send 30,000 people to dig into the ground, and the other 30,000 people will attack from the outside with me. Immediately move. Elvis passed down his orders. The spider people began to dig into the ground. The spider people had a special body structure and cultivated earth-attributed cultivation techniques, so they could easily dig into the ground and even move through the ground. Attack! Seeing that half of the army had entered the ground, Elvis did not plan on scouting because it was just a trivial 5,000 dwarves. There was nothing to scout. They would just charge forward and tear them to pieces. However, just as Elvis gave his order, a girl's figure appeared in front of the spider army. This girl was wearing tree clothes and a flower crown. Her feet were bare, and she was petite and beautiful. She stood in front of the spider army, blocking their path. Where did this elf come from? Elvis stood in front of the army. When he saw the elf suddenly appear, he was a bit stunned before angrily shouting, "Who are you?" Vivian was too lazy to bother with him as she walked step by step towards the tens of thousands of spider army. Her steps seemed slow, but they were actually very fast. In just a short while, she appeared in front of the spider army. This made the spider people go into an uproar. They didn't know what this elf was planning. Kill! Elvis didn't care. Since you dare block our path, then you can die here. A wave of poison arrows that were enough to turn a petite body into a hedgehog flew over. Who would have thought that Vivian would be completely unafraid and even indifferent? She didn't defend herself at all as she continued to advance towards the spider army. What was going on? Was there something wrong with this elf's head? Several dozen poison arrows flew over, and when the beautiful elf was about to be turned into a hedgehog, a surprising scene occurred. The arrows pierced through Vivian's body, but they didn't pierce through her body. Rather, they passed through without any resistance, stabbing into a large rock behind her. They didn't hit her? Impossible. Could it be an illusion or a ghost? That's not right. This was clearly a living person. Trying to be mysterious. Elvis pulled out a spear and personally shot it out. This spear was filled with spirit energy, but the result was the same as before. The spear landed on Vivian's body without any resistance, directly piercing through Vivian's body. The spear struck the boulder like a bolt of lightning, instantly crushing the boulder into powder. What kind of monster are you? Elvis's face turned livid, and the other spider people went into an uproar because Vivian was already less than 20 meters away. She raised her hand and slashed at Elvis. Elder Weiss instantly sensed the fluctuation of space, a space attack. No matter how strong one's defense was, it was useless against space. As long as the attacker could overcome the spatial resistance created by the objects in the space to complete the attack, this attack would ignore any defense. So, once a spatial attack formed, any kind of resistance would be meaningless. Elder Weiss reflexively pulled back and dodged, but a spatial slash slashed at his left shoulder. As a result, one of his arms was directly cut off. Damn. Kill him. Countless spider people were instantly stirred up and all kinds of attacks rained down. Vivian completely ignored these attacks, allowing the dense barrage of attacks to pass through her body. She charged into the spider army like a ghost, and those arrows passed through Vivian's body and landed on the other spider soldiers, causing quite a bit of damage to their own people. Another spatial slash was sent out. The spider count gave a pitiful cry as it was cut in half. Elvis angrily shouted, "Don't let her lock onto you." The spider army was filled with fear. This elf with innate spatial energy could kill any one of them with a raise of her hand, so why were their attacks useless against this elf? Elvis could not explain everything. He could only summon his source spirit to release spirit energy around him. The higher the energy or mass in space, the more energy it would take to use spatial attacks, so he could only use this method now. Vivian sent out 4-5 spatial slashes in a row. Elvis covered his body with strong spirit energy. Although he could not resist spatial attacks with his strength, it was a bit strenuous for Vivian to use spatial energy. So, the spatial slashes were not fast enough and Elvis dodged them each time. She didn't have much spirit energy left. Vivian knit her brows. She gave up on Elvis and immediately raised her hands. The spatial dagger source spirit appeared above her head and she aimed at another spider count. Random spatial slashes. The spider count also released his spirit energy to stop the spatial attacks, but his strength was much lower than Elvis's, so Vivian could quickly finish her attacks. She instantly sent out 7-8 spatial slashes that he could not dodge at all. No! Elvis's eyes filled with rage. The last little brother had been cut to pieces. Vivian was a bit tired and her spirit energy was almost out. If the void escaping effect disappeared, she would be in great danger. Since she had already done enough, she would leave the rest to everyone else. She cut open a spatial rift and left. The entire attack lasted for less than 2 minutes. The mysterious elf was like a ghost that appeared in the middle of the army of tens of thousands. She ignored the dense and wild attacks and cut off one of Elvis's arms. She also killed 2 spider counts that were not weak and swaggered away. Not a single hair was harmed in the entire process. The spider army felt their hairs stand on end. At this time, there were several explosions in the direction of Oldman's small town that caused the ground to shake like an earthquake. It was clear that the mines had been triggered. The mines shook the drilling spider soldiers until they were dizzy. They had no choice but to crawl out of the ground and there were quite a few of them that were injured. There are many traps in the ground, we can't pass through them. Elvis angrily raised his spear. Kill, kill, kill. Attack the dwarves' mines. I want to tear these damn things into 10,000 pieces. When the spider army was prepared to gather, large amounts of round objects fell from both sides of the canyon. When these ordinary things fell into the middle of the spider army, they immediately exploded. It was a large amount of source energy grenades. Nangong Yun picked up a storm rifle and led several thousand barbarians, coming out from both sides of the canyon. She looked down at the spider people in the canyon, annihilate them. There were over 100 storm rifles, several dozen source energy cannons, for source energy cannons, and everyone else had at least a source energy submachine gun. The moment Nangong Yun gave the order, the wild storm of energy bullets covered the canyon like a curtain of light. The dense firepower of the source energy firearms and the source energy cannons exploded several times, evaporating several dozen spider people. The source energy cannons continued to fire, targeting areas where there were many people, instantly causing heavy casualties. The spider army began to wildly scatter because this was no longer a battle, but rather a bloody massacre. With this kind of intense and dense attack, they had no way of fighting back. Activate the Berserk transformation. Nangong Yun saw that the bullets were almost used up and immediately used the loudspeaker to loudly order, "This is your chance to gain merit. Let them see the might of a berserker." The 3,000 barbarians let out inhuman roars of rage. They put down the burning guns in their hands and their bodies turned red. Their meridians were like centipedes twisting under their skin and their eyes could no longer be seen, only leaving behind a wild scarlet color. The 3,000 barbarians held the incomparably heavy profound iron weapons and jumped down from both sides of the canyon. There was no formation or tactics, They were like meteors falling from the sky. They only had one goal in their minds: kill the enemy and gain merit. The barbarian berserker swung his battle axe at a spider race soldier. That terrifying strength shattered the other side's armor and weapon, instantly collapsing a large part of the mountain. That spider race soldier had already turned into a pile of bones, flesh, organs, and armor that had been crushed into a ball. There was no fancy cultivation technique, it was pure strength, a strength that was not decorated at all. The barbarian berserkers released their strength to the limit. As long as the spider race soldiers were swept by their weapons, even if it was just a little bit, they would be smashed to pieces. The barbarian berserkers' thick, profound iron armor was hard for the spider race soldiers to break. Moreover, they had lost their sense of pain and fear, only having rage and killing intent left. They were simply a group of human meat grinders that could not be stopped. Although there weren't many berserkers, their battle strength was overwhelming. The spider race army was considered a peak elite army in the kingdom, but in front of the berserkers, they were like paper, not having any ability to resist at all. Kill! The Oldman's small town gates were pushed open and 5,000 dwarves charged out. They were completely stunned by the scene in front of them. The entire valley was filled with blood and there were broken corpses all over the ground. There was not a single complete body to be found. Several thousand soldiers covered in blood, brains, and other viscous things slowly walked out, just like demons crawling out of hell. The dwarves were completely stunned. Were these outsiders demons? You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.